My name's Alan Jones. I work at CIAM Zaragoza. I work on the SafeHabitus project with David. CIAM Zaragoza is an international organization for the Mediterranean, working on agriculture, agronomy, and aquaculture and fisheries. And we work on international development, and social development is one of those issues, and that's why we're here today. So let me, first of all, I'll start off by introducing David Meredith, who's the project coordinator. We won't give long bios. All of the bios are on the website. If you go in, you can look at them at your ease. David represents the Chagas in Irish, agricultural research and advisory service for the Irish government. He's a senior research officer and head of department. He specialized in social sustainability and many, many other things which you'll find in his CV. And he's, more importantly, the coordinator of the SafeHabitus project. William Coburn is the director of the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work. He has a degree in law and Master of Science degree in ergonomics. He's worked many years at EU OSH throughout their work program, and he has been the executive director since 2023 and has also a very impressive CV if you look there. So I'm going to follow the program. David will just kick off, and then William will also give a welcome. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Alan. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that introduction. So yes, I'm David Meredith. I work for Teagasc in Ireland, and I'm also the project coordinator for SafeHabitus. This particular seminar comes at a really important time for SafeHabitus. We're entering into our final year, and we're looking at the objectives that have been set for us, and ensuring that we've reached all of those. And one of the most important objectives that was set for the project at the very outset by the European Commission was to explore the potential of corporate social responsibility and other similar initiatives to improve working conditions for farmers and workers in agriculture. And the question really is, can voluntary ethical trade mechanisms effectively safeguard the health, safety, and decent working conditions of those who produce the food that we all eat and enjoy? And what we see across Europe, and indeed the globe, are a patchwork of corporate social responsibility initiatives, certification schemes, and supply chain standards aimed at improving labor conditions in agriculture. So large retailers make these commitments. The auditors conduct the inspections. The labels promise ethical production, but we still have fundamental questions, which is, are they effective? Do they improve working conditions? And what is their potential? And that is the question that we're trying to answer within the SafeHabitus project. And indeed, that's what we'll hear about today. So today's seminar brings together a unique combination of perspectives to give insight into the potential of these initiatives to improve working conditions for farmers and farm workers. So shortly after you've heard from William, you'll hear from new research findings from the SafeHabitus project, looking at two particular case studies of supply chains going from Morocco to the UK and Spain to Germany. But we'll also hear from a wider perspective of speakers as well. So we'll hear from an EU OSH sponsored project, so the LIFT project. And then we'll hear from practitioners, people who are engaged with this issue in terms of trying to implement ethical trading systems within supply chains. And then finally, we'll hear from policymakers, from the European Parliament, from the Economic and Social Committee, from the farming employer representatives and the trade unions as well, and the ILO. And that's where we'll get, hopefully, a good discussion around policy and how policy can support the strengthening of these systems and to make them more widespread. So the goal is not simply to exchange information today, which is a positive aspect of our work, but also to identify concrete paths or steps that we could take forward to move from what can be sometimes fragmented initiatives to more coherent and scalable solutions. So before I hand over to William, I want to acknowledge the support of the partner organizations who've made this seminar possible, in particular EU OSHA, who we're collaborating with today, but also the International Decent Work for Equitable Food Systems Coalition, the Dignity Firm Horizon Europe Project, and the International Association of Working in Agriculture. And of course, I also want to thank you for joining us today, for your engagement, and hopefully the contributions that you will make today through the chat function and later on to the discussion. And these are essential to making progress on these vital issues. So now I'd like to hand back and hand over to William. William, if you'd like to take over from me, that would be great. Thank you.
I would just like to say, before William comes in, thank you to EU OSHA for this. And the reason for EU OSHA being here today is that EU OSHA started off this process before our project with a major report. So we're very grateful to EU OSHA, but we're also grateful for the work program that EU OSHA is increasingly developing on agriculture related issues. And we're very excited to have William here today. Hi, William. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks, David, and good morning to everybody. And a big welcome to this seminar from European Agency for Safety and Health at Work here in Bilbao on this really important topic. As Alan said, I've been here at the agency for quite a while, and actually back in 2004, I was managing a project on corporate social responsibility. Back then, I think at the start of the 2000s from the European Commission, there was a strong emphasis on CSR. And from EU OSHA's perspective, we were really promoting how CSR was an important mechanism for improving occupational safety and health. I think it's fair to say that since then, there was a drop in the priority given to CSR, but then the renewed interest, particularly with the Corporate Social Responsibility Due Diligence Directive and all the surrounding discussions, I think is very welcome, and also seeing that workers' working conditions, decent work are in the forefront of those discussions. The whole issue of how we ensure effective risk prevention is really at the core of what EU OSHA does. And I should just briefly say that the agency has a threefold mission. In the first instance, the agency is carrying out research, analyzing data, collecting. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have my video on. Is that okay now? Yeah. Sorry, I was just saying the agency has a threefold mission. In the first instance, it's collecting data, carrying out surveys, analyzing research to support evidence-based policy making and regulation. So very relevant, I think, for the work that David's described for the seminar today. In the second pillar, the agency is gathering examples of good practice, developing guidance, and so on to support practical prevention of risks in the workplace. And the third pillar is to raise awareness, to stimulate a positive OSH prevention culture. And our Healthy Workplaces campaigns really speak to that. When we're looking at how we can ensure effective risk prevention in the workplace, I would point you to the research that EU OSHA has done in understanding what is actually happening at the workplace level. And primarily, we've done that through an employer-directed survey where we're interviewing the person given the responsibility for managing health and safety day to day. We ask about how that's carried out, what are the main obstacles and drivers, how workers are involved. And through the analysis of those data, one of the most important findings, I think, was that many of the enterprises that are not really taking action to prevent risks are found at the sharp end of a supply chain where they have severe resource constraints, where there are not the common incentives that might be found amongst other groups. And this is really something that we've been digging into, particularly in the supporting compliance activity that's been running for a number of years under DIETMA's coordination. And in that, we've been looking at the influence of the supply chains, certification, recognition schemes, the role of labour inspection, of prevention services, and so on. And that has really fed in to some of the reports that you heard about just now, and really leading into the Lift OSH project, many of whom the researchers are here with us today, with many, I think, valuable and insightful findings. And so it's really great to see that the results of that are coming through and then being discussed in the seminar today. It also strengthens the work we've been doing in support of the agriculture sector. We've been covering a sectoral approach when looking at dangerous substances, at musculoskeletal disorders, and currently we're undertaking large-scale research leading up to a campaign on psychosocial risks. And again, in those, I just want to highlight that we will be focusing on agricultural sector workers as well. I won't go on anymore. It is just an introduction. I wish I could stay for all of the seminar, but unfortunately I have a cybersecurity obligation. But I wish you all the best and really look forward to hearing about the outcomes of the webinar. So with that, I hand back to you, Alan, and say thanks again.
Thank you, William. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much. And if you can catch a little bit more, that would be great. See you. I'm going to just briefly introduce Sandra because Sandra's chairing the next session. Sandra Schiavi. Well, you have the medal, Sandra, for getting up earliest, I think. I think it's about 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock or something where you are in Brazil. And I think this shows the importance of this issue globally, not just in Europe, and how the interactions between Europe and the rest of the world are. Sandra is based in Brazil. She's a production engineer, and she's at the University of Maringá in Brazil. She's representing the International Association of Work in Agriculture, which is a fascinating organization covering all aspects of work in agriculture. I'll just pass to you, Sandra, and thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Thank you, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. If there is any problem with my audio or video, please let me know. Thank you for the invitation to be here as a chair for this session, and congratulations for the organization of the workshop. I will just introduce the panelists for this session, for session B, and I'll hand over for them. First, we'll have Dr. Dietmar Elsner. He has been working as a senior researcher project manager at EU OSH since 2006. At EU OSH, Dr. Elsner is head of the project on supporting compliance, international supply chains, economic aspects of occupational safety and health, and coordination of campaign partners. And supports the development of the interactive data visualization of OSH parameter. He has worked from 2003 to 2002 at BAWA, and from 1999 to 2003, he worked at the University of Technology at Braunschweig in the Department of Ergonomics, and he graduated in work sociology and ergonomics at Bonn University. After we'll have Carlos Ruiz Ramirez, who is a sociologist and political scientist, specialized in business and human rights, and a PhD candidate in migration studies. He works as a project manager and researcher within the private sector team at Oxfam Intermon, where he focuses on agriculture value chains, labor migration, and the impacts of market dynamics on the living and working conditions of migrant workers in the agri-food sector. His research and project work combine a value chain perspective with a strong emphasis on labor rights, decent work, and corporate accountability. He's the WP5 leader of the Horizon Europe project SafeHabitus. After, as our third panelist, we'll have Maria Munaritu. She's a senior program and operations officer with the ILO Vision Zero Fund, where she works to promote the fundamental right to a safe and healthy working environment across supply chains. She has over 15 years of experience in international cooperation, managing and supporting the implementation of research and capacity development initiatives related to decent work, with a particular focus on the promotion of fundamental principles and rights at work. In recent years, she has coordinated the fund's activities in the coffee supply chain, overseeing work currently underway, most notably in Brazil and Colombia. And Maria holds a master's degree in law and diplomacy from the Fletcher School, Tufts University, and a bachelor degree in sociology from the University of Buenos Aires. And finally, we'll have Victor Prada. Victor Prada is secretary of the World Banana Forum at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United States. He has more than 25 years of experience in the agri-food sector, working across Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean and Asia on sustainable value chains, responsible business conduct, and multi-stakeholder governance. Victor coordinates global initiatives on living wages and incomes, occupational health and safety, environmental sustainability, and due diligence in the banana sector, fostering collaboration among governments, producers, workers, organizations, companies, retailers, and civil society to advance the sustainable development goals. So I would hand over to Dr. Dietmar, please. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the nice introduction, Sandra, and a very warm welcome to all of you. I hope you can see and hear me well. Many thanks for the SafeHabitus project to host this webinar. Many thanks to Alan and David for organizing this. And I'm really delighted that we have here the opportunity to present our work on the agricultural sector and the role of ethical trade and market mechanisms to improve working conditions and health and safety in the sector, and can really say that this market leverage mechanisms, they can have a significant role in advancing working conditions and health and safety, but of course it cannot replace the regulation. Let me share with you my presentation. I hope you can see it. Let's start the presentation mode. Can you see the presentation mode? Okay, here it is.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, great. And yeah, as William already introduced, this Lift OSH project is about the analysis of the influence of supply chains on health and safety, especially in the agricultural sector. Lift OSH stands for Leverage Instruments for OSH, for Occupational Safety and Health. So nice acronym developed by our contractors from the Danish University, from Professor Peter Hessel, which I would like to highlight here, that they have done the work for us. And as William said in the beginning, so this was done in this framework of the supporting compliance activity, where we ask ourselves the question, so what actually influences the compliance in enterprises, especially the smaller enterprises? Because on the one hand, we have the legislation, how it should be, and the compliance then shows how it is in reality, and that can be quite different. And then we analyze these different influencing factors, like enforcement, labor inspectors, prevention services. We have done a huge study in 5 different countries on innovative practice on labor inspectors and prevention services. also on business incentives like accident insurance incentives, for example, bonus-malus systems. I just mention this because when we say how can we influence the health and safety via the supply chain, always comes up. Yeah, but what about regulation? We need regulation as well. Of course, we need, just to make clear, we have also take this into account. We see the whole picture, but in this project, we focus on the supply chain, on the influence of larger enterprises on smaller enterprises, either directly via the supply chain or via social reporting mechanisms. So we focused in this project on construction and agri-food sector. Obviously, in this presentation, I will focus on the agriculture sector. We have chosen these sectors because they have higher rates of fatal accidents than other sectors. They are also dominated by a few multinational enterprises, like in the food sector, but we have many SMEs, many small farms, for example. We have a high worker mobility within the EU, but also coming from outside the EU. We have a lot of contracting and subcontracting. There's always a dynamic work environment, for example, due to weather conditions. We have new interesting supply chain legislation, European level and national level, who could have an influence. And we have new technologies like robotics, like drones, and so on. So very interesting sector. And we looked at the supply chain, and as a unit of analysis, we chose a dyad between the buyer and the contractor, because you can break down every supply chain. It's a chain of buyers and suppliers in the end. And we discussed also all the other influences like EU regulation, directives, public pressures, media, consumer, and we think that all these influences are also then mirrored in this dyad of the supplier and the buyer. And our contractors, they went to these firms to analyze the workplaces, to talk to them, and we focus. So on this dyad, we can have either a contractual governance, like written contracts, policies and conducts and certification schemes, but we have also this relational governance. So what is the level of trust between buyer and supplier? How long they are dealing with each other, they are sharing values and so on. For example, in Spain, many farmers are organized in cooperatives. They work for a long time together, and maybe that they don't have even written agreements. So this social aspect is also an important aspect in the buyer-supplier regulations. And we work with qualitative research, so with case studies going down all the supply chain from a supermarket company to the smaller family farm. So we really put this farm to fork approach from the EU into practice. So we had here on the left side the small family farms. They are delivering vegetables and fruits to a distributor, to a supplier, and then to a supermarket, which we called the focal company. For example, we had southern Spanish farmers delivering fruits to northern Spanish supermarkets, or we had Danish supermarkets buying apples and fruits from Germany or from Poland. So we had different supply chains all over Europe, and we made this qualitative analysis of the dyads. And in short, we saw that these supermarkets, how they analyzed, how they managed the supply chain. And we have also summarized this in a bigger report, but we made also more handy policy briefs regarding the sectors, regarding specific mechanisms in the supply chains. And in the agri-food industry, we indeed see this risks of the workplace associated to work in the nature, or the changing weather conditions, heat and cold. We have a lot of migrant seasonal workers, and the relationships. We said, okay, there are these long-term relations between the farmers and the cooperativas, for example, and also the supermarkets. They value very much this local production, so that they had products from local farmers. But we have also this contractual governments like formal tendering and contracting processes and auditing and monitoring processes. Now, how were these audits and visits organized? Of course, the supermarket, the main, let's say, objective of them is, the main aim is to check the food quality. But in certain, let's say, certification schemes, there's also the workplace conditions, working conditions integrated, or the health and safety conditions, like, for example, in this global GAP scheme or Prevención Integrada in Spain. So they also checked issues related with work and migration, or in health and safety. What are the prevention plans? How is the training done for workers to, for example, in safe handling practices, or the delivery of personal protective equipment? So this was also integrated in these certification schemes and checked in visits. So the benefits of these certification schemes are that they have an element of health safety integrated into this, not only food safety, and that there's a third-party involvement, a third-party check that is more for better traceability and transparency. The challenge is that there are a wide range of standards on the market, and which one to select, and that is also a potential burden for small farms, for smaller producers. I mean, small farms are not exactly looking for more bureaucratic work to do. I mean, we know it's really challenging for them. So the suggestions are to reduce the standards and to make the schemes more transparent. And what we also saw for overall on the buyer side, from the supermarkets, for example, that their procurement department and their CSR, their sustainability department, they are kind of decoupled. So quite often they don't work really together, or they don't know what the other department is doing. So the procurement objectives is really price, quality, and delivery in time. And then we have the sustainability department, CSR department, which signs the international agreements and so on. And sometimes they really the link is too weak. I mean, we also had other examples, for example, from chocolate producers now who produce sustainable, high quality chocolate, and they are really looking in the procurement where the sustainability is really part of the procurement. And but similar, it's also on the supplier side. So we have the production is focused on delivery and quality, and then on the other hand, there is this compliance department that looks more at the paperwork, and that these two departments are not really talking to each other. So that we see as a general problem, and we argue for a better integration of these two things, of the procurement and the sustainability. And as William mentioned, we have an upcoming campaign on mental health, where also the farm workers and farmers are one focus, let's say, and also to underline how important the agricultural sector is for EU OSH. So we have just recently issued this report on protecting farmers and farm workers' mental health. And we see this high workload, for example, long working hours, which can lead to mental health issues like depression or even suicide. And we have also high rates of burnout, high rates of suicide among farmers. And we see that some countries, they have already some policies in place, like helplines, like support programs for the farmers from social insurance, for example. And our report really analyzes psychosocial risks, gives some statistics also from the surveys we have done, and it outlines the main initiatives on mental health in the agriculture sector, which we have found in member states. And I invite you to check out this report. And as I said, as we have the upcoming campaign on mental health, which will start in autumn this year, there will be more information also on mental health in the farm sector. So as a summary, we can say that our findings show that we can use this market leverage supply chain mechanisms to advance health and safety in the supply chain. But of course, market leverage cannot replace regulation. We have these agricultural due diligence requirements in the supply chains, but they must be also tailored to the smaller suppliers. They have to be integrated better with existing certification schemes. As a good example, in our report, they cited the Norwegian certification where food safety and OSH is integrated. Also for the practitioners on the buyer side, we have seen this decoupling of the sustainability department and procurement department, which should be better integrated. And also, let's say, on the more relational government, which is also very important, the relations that we use longer-term contracts to foster stability in investment, that there is a better relation between suppliers and buyers. So, for example, supporting training with seeds and machinery. So that are initiatives how the buyers can support the suppliers and stay in dialogue. So, for example, also with a visit.
Sorry, interrupting. Could you please wrap up because of the
That
time?
is the last slide. Sorry, I'm just coming to the end. It always takes longer than you think. And also from the supplier side that we need to ensure flexible delivery terms. We know there are unforeseen weather conditions, for example, that problems arise so that there is a better understanding on the buyer side for the small farmers. Okay, that was a short introduction into this project. I invite you to check out this report on our website, and we will provide the link also with the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sorry, is there a question here? And it says...
perhaps we'll take questions at the end, and Sandra will
Thank you.
organize that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Let's just hand over for Carlos. Please, Carlos, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Again, thank you very much to everyone who organized this webinar, especially to Alan, David, and the IDEAL team. Thank you, Sandra, for introducing me before. As mentioned, my name is Carlos Ruiz, and I work at Oxfam Intermo, which is Oxfam Spain, as a researcher and project manager in the NGO. Today, I'm presenting the findings of the report, Enabling Conditions for Market Development, Supporting Ethical Working Conditions, a systematic evaluation of CSR design and implementation in the horticulture sector. The deliverable 5.2 of the European project SafeHabitus in the frame of the Work Package 5 of the projects. This work looks at how corporate social responsibility, CSR, and human rights due diligence policies are made and put into practice in the horticulture sector. It focuses on two strawberry value chain one linking production in Huelva with supermarkets in Germany, and the other one linking production in Morocco with supermarkets in the United Kingdom. The main goal is to understand how these corporate and legal frameworks affect working conditions, occupational health and safety, and the vulnerability of migrant and seasonal farm workers. The comparison matters because it looks at two different regulatory models, one more binding system in Germany and a system in the UK that is mainly based on transparency. In the end, the report asks what conditions help and what conditions block the market from moving toward more ethical supply chains. Regarding the methodology, I will be brief. The study used a comparative and qualitative approach with two cases studies, as I say, Huelva, which is in southern Spain, linked to the supermarkets in Germany, and Morocco linked to the supermarkets in United Kingdom. It combines document analysis and fieldwork. On the document side, we analyze CSR policies, modern slavery statements, a lot of documentation that come from the supermarkets in general. On the fieldwork side, it carried out 15 semi-structured interviews with key actors, such as independent experts, suppliers, and producers. German supermarkets, as well as a focus group with representatives from 5 UK supermarkets. Fieldwork took place in the production area, Huelva, southern Spain, and the Larache region in northwestern Morocco. The goal was to map CSR and due diligence practices, understand how they connect with business strategies, especially buying practices, and assess their effect on working conditions and labor vulnerability. The report explained that CSR is moving from being mostly voluntary to becoming more enforceable through human rights due diligence rules. In the past, CSR in agri-food supply chain mainly relied on voluntary tools like code of conduct, social audits, ethical commitment. These tools have helped spread the standards, but they also have clear limits. They are often hard to enforce. Monitoring there are usually no real penalties in this frame. In many cases, companies act mainly to protect their image, which can lead to uneven and superficial actions. In the UK, the best example of this is the Modern Slavery Act that born in 2015, especially the Section 54 in the law. This law requires some companies to publish a yearly statement on slavery and trafficking risk in their supply chains. It is mainly a transparency model. Companies explain what they're doing, but the law doesn't require specific due diligence steps, and it doesn't set strong penalties for non-compliance. As a result, the quality of depth of action changes between companies, which shows the limit of relying only on reporting. By contrast, several European countries have adopted mandatory laws. For example, in the report we talk about the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act from Germany, adopted in 2021 and enforced since 2023 January. These laws require certain companies to set up risk management system, regularly identify and assess human rights risk, take preventive and corrective measures, provide accessible complaint mechanism, and publish reports. They also include oversight and the possibility of administrative penalties. At EU level, the report links this trend to the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the CSDDD, adopted in 2024. Its aim is to align the duties of large companies operating in the EU, including major supermarket chains, of course. But the report also gives a key warning. Moving from voluntary to mandatory rules doesn't automatically lead to real improvements. Due diligence can become mostly paperwork and audits without real changes in wages, for example, or working hours, or housing condition, or even health and safety condition, or in worker, for example, ability to speak up safely and obtain remedy. Now, I will briefly summarize the two case studies that we analyze. I will start with the Huelva and Germany case. In this context, in the Huelva Germany strawberry chain, the context is shaped by a binding legal framework linked to the Germany due diligence law, as I said before. According to the report, this has brought some formal improvement. for example, more structured risk management system and more detailed mapping of labor risks. The report notes that one large supermarket, for example, carried out one human rights impact assessment for this supply chain. This human rights impact assessment provides detailed information on the vulnerability faced by migrant workers in the sector. Based on the assessment, the supermarket develop an action plan. For example, on housing, workers' voice, and purchasing practices, but overall the plan has not been as impactful as originally expected. At the same time, the report shows that important problems remain. Interviews point to a compliance cultural focus on passing audits and meeting requirements rather than improving working conditions in a meaningful way. The report describes gaps between paperwork and reality. It also explained that the use of labor intermediaries and subcontracting in agriculture make it harder to trace responsibility because accountability is spread across different actors. On top of that, seasonal work often concentrated in short harvesting period, and the vulnerable position of part of the workforce can limit real protection, even when deployment is formally declared. Overall, the Huelva Germany case showed both progress and clear limits. A binding framework can push formal improvements and, in some cases, proactive steps, but major risks remain when due diligence becomes merely a documentation exercise instead of a change in deeper practices on farm and in businesses relationships. Now we'll talk about the second case study, Morocco, United Kingdom value chain. In the Morocco-UK chain, the situation is different because the regulatory model is more focused on transparency, as I said before, more focused on transparency than mandatory due diligence without enforceable duties beyond reporting. The report finds that the response relies more on a voluntary and cooperative tools. It describes innovative initiatives as a multi-actor platform where retailers and organizations coordinate efforts together and approach that try to go beyond traditional auditing. It also mentions worker voice tools such as anonymous surveys, apps, or hotlines, and rapid response system when allegation or media report some abuses are reported. These tools show a logic strongly shaped by reputational incentives, proving to the public and investor that action is being taken. However, the report identifies strong structural limits as well. Because participation is voluntary, the model lacks the enforcement powers in Germany in this case, and this reduces consistency and depth. A major gap appears between formal commitment and what happened on the farm. One key finding is the weakness of social audits when there are strong incentives to hide problems. Farms may prepare for inspection, coach workers, and stage compliance, which make it harder to detect real conditions. The report also showed that the Moroccan labor context brings deep challenges than Spain in this case. It confirmed high level of informality in the strawberry sector, with especially strong impact on rural women hired during harvest period. Informality often means no contract, less access to social protection, and weaker safeguard, increasing vulnerability to abuse or arbitrary dismissal. Even when employment is formal, precariousness can remain with very short contracts and reliance on intermediaries, as I said before, which means workers have less power to negotiate. Overall, Morocco, United Kingdom case show creativity in tools and cooperation, but at the same time show clear limits. Without enforceable duties and strong oversight, improvements are often partial and even easier to undermine through surface level compliance. After looking both cases, the report compared the two supply chains by focusing on a residual risk, the social problems that still remain even after the CSR and due diligence steps. The assessment covered 8 dimensions, including audit and legal compliance, buying practice, employment formalization, health and safety, CSR due diligence design and implementation, reputational dynamics, labor vulnerability, and the distribution of power and value in the chain. The result show differences. In Huelva, Germany, residual risks tend to be lower in employment formalization and legal support. There is more formal hiring and a legal framework that reduce some risk, at least on paper. In Morocco, United Kingdom value chain, performance seems relatively stronger in reputational dynamic and the use of collaborative tools, but residual risks remain higher in key areas like formal employment, occupational health and safety, and also workers' vulnerability. At the same time, the report highlights shared weakness, and this is one of the main message of the report. In both chains, residual risks remain high when it comes to supermarkets buying practices and the way power and value are distributed. The reason is structural. A supermarket have a strong position in the market. They set the standards, timeline, prices, and how much of the business risk and the cost of meeting standard is pushed onto the producers, the companies. The report described buying practices that increase pressure to cut labor costs, such a last-minute order, for example, rigid delivery windows, the ability to reject products with uneven consequences, and delay on payments, for example. When this logic dominates, CSR and due diligence can become secondary. Compliance exists just on paper, but conditions don't improve on the ground if businesses' incentives push in the opposite direction. As a result, the vulnerability of migrant and seasonal workers remain a structural feature in both chains. The report points to common factors: dependence on employers for housing and transportation, peak periods with very long and intense work days, limited ability to organize collectively due to fear, barriers, or the short-term nature of the employment, and fear of negative consequences for speaking up or reporting problems. In Huelva, even with higher formalization, gap between law and practice can continue. In Morocco, informality and weak protection make the problem worse. The overall conclusion is that regulation matters, but it's not enough if structural problems are not addressed, especially supermarkets' buying power and how risk and value are shared. I would also like to mention that Huelva strawberry sector is one of the sectors that receives the most criticism in Europe regarding labor rights. Because of that, it can be difficult to get all the transparency we would like from the supply chain. In Morocco, however, we did not face this problem. We were surprised by how open and transparent the supply chain actors were there. To finish, I will talk about the key recommendation. I think one of the key points of the report. We have two kind of recommendation. One for the supermarkets and the other one for European Union. For supermarkets, the recommendations are in general to ensure labor and human rights respect across the whole supply chain, with real monitoring and corrective action, not only formal requirements. They also stress the need to pay fairer prices and share value more evenly, so the same decent wages and conditions are financially possible. Another key point is to integrate human rights into the corporate decision making, so purchasing choices are not driven only by cost savings. Finally, the report calls for more transparency about supplier risk and actions taken, and for changes in purchasing practices with better planning, a more stable supplier relationship, and business strategies that support more ethical production. For the European Union, the recommendations are to implement the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive in a strong and ambitious way, with clear obligation, proper oversight, and effective sanctions. The report also stressed the need to make it easier for people harmed in supply chains to access to justice and get remedy. Another key point is to include a clear focus on living wages, not only the legal minimum wage. It also called for rules that connect due diligence with real business practices, so low prices and unfair contract terms do not push conditions down. Finally, it recommends closing gaps in the directive and improving related law through solid transposition and future updates that make the system work in the practice. In conclusion, the SafeHabitus report offers a critical evaluation of how CSR and due diligence work into a strawberry value chain and which labor risks still remain. The comparison suggests that law matters. A binding framework can push formal improvement and some proactive measure, but voluntary has clear limits and compliance can stay just on the paper. The final message is that moving toward ethical and safe working conditions in horticulture requires a full approach, a strong and enforceable legal framework, business and buyer practices that match due diligence goals, transparency with consequences, and real workers' voice that is protected and able to influence the decisions. Only then can agri-food supply chain become real driver of sustainability and social justice. That said, I will also like to highlight that in parallel to this report, another report was produced. It also covered the strawberry
please
sector.
conclude, Carlos?
Yeah.
Ahead of
10 seconds. 10 seconds. It's also the other report I'm talking about also covered the strawberry sector in Morocco and Huelva, but from the perspective of migrant workers, civil society organizations, trade unions, public authorities, and agricultural companies as well. You can find the report in the results section, and I think it was in the chat of the SafeHabitus project website under the work package 5. I recommend you to read it because it's complement the report I present today very well and help provide a more clear picture of the migration dynamic linked to these actors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Thank you. I'll just hand over to Maria. Maria, please, if you have a presentation to share, share your screen. And thank you very much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I'm now sharing my screen. Let me set it up there. I think you can see it, right?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. So thank you and good morning, everyone. I'm also based in Latin America, so it's indeed very early, but it's a pleasure to join this webinar. Thank you very much to the organizers for the opportunity to share with everyone the fund's work. For those of you who are not familiar with Vision Zero Fund, it is a G7 initiative administered by the International Labour Organization that aims to advance towards this vision of zero workplace-related accidents, injuries, and diseases in global supply chains. It started in 2016 under the German presidency of the G7. And over the past 10 years, this year is the 10-year anniversary, the fund has worked in 14 countries for supply chains, including the agricultural supply chain, and it has reached 8 million beneficiaries. As mandated by the ILO governing body, ILO Supply Chain Interventions, let me just put this down there, ILO Supply Chain Interventions generally target less developed countries rather than supply chains within or between countries with strong governments. As you can see on the screen, we have thus implemented actions across Latin America, Africa, and Asian countries. At the beginning of every VZF intervention, the fund convenes governments, employers, and workers' representatives to work together and to establish social dialogue to determine which supply chain we're going to focus on in a given country. Interventions then usually take place at 3 levels. So at global level, we promote collective actions through social dialogue. At national level, we work to strengthen legal and policy frameworks. And at workplace level, we work to accelerate workplace level OSH improvements. What the fund usually does at the beginning of each intervention is to run what we call an assessment of drivers and constraints for OSH improvements, following an ILO methodology that I will then share with you through the chat. And basically, this methodology comprises value chain assessment and mapping of stakeholders that includes buyers and suppliers, but also it tries to better understand the mandate and the interests that other actors have, such as the government, employers organizations, the workers organizations, and tries to identify the entry points for OSH improvement along the supply chain. The assessment leads to evidence-based intervention models, we call it, which is a combination of activities that stakeholders, supply chain stakeholders, jointly with the fund, commit to implementing for driving OSH improvements throughout a given project and beyond. Today, the examples that I'm going to give you as I walk you through the presentation, they are related to coffee. And why did I choose coffee? In part because it's the work that I've been managing over the past years in the fund, but also coffee is a consumer product that exhibits characteristics of buyer-driven governance. So in buyer-driven governance, buyer-driven chains, as you know, final products are sold by lead firms, so brand or retailers that do not own the stages of production, but purchase from or outsource to unaffiliated third parties. In the case of coffee, it brings a plethora of stakeholders together. And as I believe Carlos was mentioning also in agriculture, it's an agricultural supply chain, that we have seasonal and short-term need for harvesting occupationals that tend to support temporary or informal labor arrangements. And workers in the farming stage are likely to be exposed to the occupational hazards and risk, and often lack mechanisms or systems to cope with any consequences that might arise. So I think I'll continue. In terms of what we learned over the years, just to anchor a little bit more and work on the theme of this webinar, very quickly, I wanted to share with you some learnings that can help us understand how a supply chain approach can act as leverage to advance OSH improvements. So in every assessment of drivers and constraints that we conducted in the agricultural sector in general, but also in the coffee supply chain, what we saw is that the most cited reason for suppliers to invest in making OSH improvements were demands to meet buyer standards. So the buyers or brands were mandating compliance with OSH requirements, or production was requiring certification to a certain standard, or they were exporting to a country that require the products to meet safety and food standards. Now, what we saw is that the interest in social and environmental standards varies by end market. In the EU and to some extent in North America, demands were stronger, whereas apparently in Asia and markets and in developing countries in general, the emphasis was still primarily on price competitiveness with limited demand or emphasis on sustainability. Now, in general, the evidence shows that when importing markets increase the working condition standards, they require a stronger safety and health requirements for the entry of products into their country. It does drive OSH improvement in supplying countries. The second learning that it's also related to some things that we're priorly mentioning in the webinar is related to certifications. And although most certifications require adherence to ILO core standards, they have provisions, especially in relation to managing hazardous chemicals, in relation to PPP use, in relation to access to clean water and sanitary, OSH plans, providing training to workers and so on, they generally do not cover physical, mechanical, biological, ergonomic, or psychosocial risks. So PCIs, what we saw in the assessments that we did was that they still have limitations. However, as you can see on the screen, the notion of compliance initiative is an effective medium for promoting improvements in the practices of suppliers and in OSH in general. And then the third lesson, which is more general in relation to progress and evolution, we did our first assessment around 2017 in Laos in the coffee sector. And the last assessment, which was not technically the methodology that we usually implement, but it was very similar. It took some components of the methodology, was done in Brazil last year. And what we saw is that there is, so supply chains are changing, stakeholders are changing. They have now a better understanding of how OSH can drive OSH improvements. and why their supply chain improvement. So decent work improvements across the supply chain, in particularly in terms of fundamental principles and rights at work. So in the case of Brazil, for example, in the assessment, what we saw is that stakeholders had a very different, I would say, but I think like they had evolved, like their conception of how OSH can serve to also advance other fundamental principles and rights along the supply chain, notably for eliminating forced labor, eliminating child labor, and advancing collective bargaining was very strong. So we see this evolution and how the supply chain, the coffee supply chain, is transforming and becoming more aware of this, and OSH being a strategic entry point. In terms of what we do, the interventions of that we specifically do, the activities. So we do a lot of awareness raising campaigns in the coffee supply chain. You might have heard about the hashtag Coffee People campaign that we ran a couple of years ago. We had over 25 million people joining the social media challenge that was launched to bring about visibility to the workers behind the cup of coffee that we all drink, and the OSH conditions and the decent work conditions that they face. And this awareness raising campaign led to, or it was a call to action for the stakeholders, particularly those at the upper tiers of the chain, so the companies, to pledge to concrete actions for changing. We also do lots of more focused research. So we've done research of temporary workers in Mexico, in Colombia, and then this research, it's always action-oriented and it leads to other activities. Social dialogue plus, we put it there, is still very important for us. We're usually an active participant or a convener in different regional state-level committees in Colombia, for example, in Risaralda or in the Huila, where these committees involve different stakeholders, from producers to cooperatives, from exporters to brands, from regional to national authorities. So we help to drive that dialogue, that sectoral dialogue. We do a lot of capacity development, and we usually develop or adapt different tools. You're probably familiar, those of you who come from the OSH side, with the WIN methodology that the ILO implements at the workplace level. So we adapted the WIN methodology to the coffee sector, and we work using a training of trainers approach to replicate and reach scale at the farm level. But we also, in Brazil, we piloted this year a methodology to improve cooperatives' capacities, OSH capacities, so that they can also then be a multiplier and provide better OSH services to their members. We also do labor inspection training in different countries. So we really target the different stakeholders in the chain where the research has identified that they can act as stakeholders that can change, that can bring about change. And we also focus a lot on partnerships and South-South cooperation. This year, there's a picture there. So we brought together 6 different countries, 3 from Latin America, 3 from Africa, all together to share the learnings, the challenges, and the strategies that they are implementing for OSH promotion in their countries. This work is primarily funded by Germany, France, and the European Commission. These are all the publications and tools. I will then share with you the links on the chat. And maybe in the interest of time, I will just stop there, but remain available for any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. And I would like now to invite Victor for his presentation. And then after Victor, we conclude the session B of this workshop. Victor, thank you for being here, and please feel comfortable to share your screen if you need, and the floor is yours.
Hello, Sandra, thank you. Can you please confirm that you can see my screen and you can hear me appropriately?
Yes, everything's fine.
Perfect. So thank you very much. First of all, as my colleagues mentioned before, thanks for the organizers. This is a very important topic, so we are really thankful for this initiative. Then very quick, the World Banana Forum hosted by FAO is a permanent multi-stakeholder platform that brings together all the key actors in the banana value chain, from governments to producer associations, companies, retailers, trade unions, civil society, researchers, other agencies, the ILO. My colleague just presented information from the ILO. And our purpose is simple but ambitious. We try to improve sustainability, resilience, and fairness across this big, important banana sector through a structured dialogue and practical evidence-based cooperation. So maybe for those of you who do not know, bananas are globally important because it's a staple crop, staple food for millions of people. It's the most traded fresh fruit. It's the fourth most important agricultural commodity nowadays. Is produced in the south, mostly consumed in the north, everywhere, but it's an important commodity. It's a favorite fruit in the supermarkets. And this industry is extensive and highly labor intensive, involving large number of workers across farms, packaging stations, transport, logistics, and is often in hot, physically demanding conditions with potential to exposure to agrochemicals, aerial spraying, machinery, psychological risk, etc. So that scale and risk profile make occupational health and safety a critical priority for us, and it protects workers and families, strengthens productivity and continuity, and provides practical, measurable entry points, for human rights due diligence and continuous improvement. Because occupational health and safety challenges, and prevention, workers' participation and accountability are common across crops. But the banana sector epitomizes all these challenges together. So it's important for us because due to the size and the volume of bananas, the export volumes of bananas is double than the total fishery export volumes. So imagine the amount of containers and families involved in banana production and exports. Therefore, is a replicable window for other agricultural commodities seeking a fairer and safer value chain. That being said, so that lays the foundation for the explanation of what we are doing. The World Banana Forum flagship initiative to strengthen occupational health and safety is called BOHESI. BOHESI stands for the Banana Occupational Health and Safety Initiative, which we launched back in 2014. And was decided to be a practical guidance and tools and training approaches that can be applied at farm and company level, while supporting dialogue and national authorities and social partners. BOHESI is particularly relevant as it works across multiple contexts. Rather than producing one generic manual, the approach is to adapt core tools and national legislation into institutional realities and sector structures, and then validate those with all the stakeholders. BOHESI is a unique example of tripartite cooperation. So when we launched BOHESI in 2014, first thing we did was to map all the actors. We started the activity in 2 countries. That was Ecuador, because Ecuador, for your information, is by far the main banana exporting governments. 250,000 workers work directly in the industry, and 2.5 million people is involved directly or indirectly in the activities of the banana industry. Therefore, it was a niche, of a market that we really needed to get in touch with, and then that's what we did, with BOHESI, with the shared objective of improving prevention and occupational health and safety risk through clearer standards, better risk assessment, more effective training, a stronger engagement of workers, and it builds on this continuous improvement. So occupational health and safety is treated not as one of audit requirement because we have certification scheme coming, but as a management culture grounded in participation and accountability. This is the timeline of what we did. So as mentioned, we started in 2014 in Ecuador, and as mentioned, it was a strategic starting point for this replication objective, that we can then move to other countries exporting bananas. We started mainly with banana exporting countries. By 2017, we had the manual occupational health and safety ready, which was formally launched by the Ministry of Labor. The minister himself back then was Raúl Ledesma. We launched that in Geneva in the third global conference of the World Banana Forum as a strong example of multi-stakeholder cooperation. This tripartite dialogue was really important. Occasions when we launch this type of activities, if we don't count on the public sector, they think that we cooked everything with the public, with the civil society and the private sector. We don't include the civil society, trade unions. They think that we cook this only with the public sector without the intervention of workers and worker representatives. So this demonstrated that the initiative was designed to be flexible and aligned to the national legal framework, but also an example of cooperation, even I would say of pre-competitive cooperation. Then we've replicated the activities in Ghana. We had the national manual for Ghana, and then for literate workers, we also produce videos on occupational health and safety. So we produce a full-fledged portfolio of activities on occupational health and safety. 2022, we developed the guidance for safe and healthy employment of women workers. Very important, the women component in all our activities, ensuring that occupational health and safety approaches are not gender blind. It's a risk. Prevention systems need to effectively protect everyone, including vulnerable groups. And then in 2023, we replicated the activities in other countries like Colombia, Peru. I will give you more information in following slides. This is the result of the activities in Ecuador. Ecuador started as a manual for practitioners, for, as mentioned before, workers and plantation owners. But we were a bit ambitious, and then the result was so positive that the government decided to adopt the manual as the national manual on occupational health and safety. I think reaching institutional impact is very important because we move from standalone activities that could die once the project dies into something sustainable in the long term, because we reach this institutional impact. So the Ecuadorians Ministerial Agreement 108, released by the Ministry of Labor, in coordination with the Ministry of Agriculture and ES, made this the implementation of the manual mandatory, and then this was the kind of the formal national recognition of our work. So we also, of course, cooperated with our colleagues from the ILO to implement the activities. The meetings that we've organized in Geneva, the third global conference of the World Banana Forum was organized back-to-back with the ILO, precisely to reflect on how cooperation is important, not only in this tripartite dialogue, but also within UN agencies. This is the guidelines for women workers, which have been reviewed by stakeholders and then published in Spanish and English. Women workers are exposed to a lot of things, from PPE feed, the equipment that they are supposed to use, maternity protection, sanitation, commuting, vulnerability in different forms, from sexual harassment to other things. Banana industry, as mentioned before, is a key commodity, is the favorite fruit, is produced in developing countries, most of it, and then, of course, we are supposed to protect vulnerable groups, and making also not only the national manual occupational health and safety was important, but also having a gender lens on everything we are doing was extremely relevant for the activities we were doing in the future. We have replicated, as mentioned at the beginning, activities in other main banana exporting countries. So the Colombia pilot was launched in 2023 with retailer support. We, as mentioned at the beginning, the first slide, we are an inclusive platform. Therefore, we have the buying power and the producers together with representatives from the trade unions, which is extremely important. Not always we have funding from governments to make this possible. So we have the buying power to help us, and then our colleagues, Carlos, our colleagues from our panelists before my intervention talked about the CSDDD, the CSRD, regulations. We moved from voluntary standards to mandatory regulations. That also helps us to convince retailers to provide support to improve the situation of workers. And for example, the activities we've been doing in Colombia were subsidized by the private sector, by retailers. And of course, it's aligned with the Colombian occupational health and safety laws and standards. It's national alignment is very important to our activities to make sure that legitimacy, usability, and sovereignty are respected. And it's also integrated with the ILO risk assessment tools for MSEs mentioned by my colleague Maria before. So very important also to follow the gender guidance that we've mentioned before. We work with different plantations. The idea of all our activities in different countries, not with the scope of work that we did in Ecuador, because we trained more than 5,000 workers and trade union representatives. But when we replicate the activities in other countries, we try to have this training of trainers program so we can replicate the activities as much as possible. Then in 2025, last year, we've also replicated the activities in Peru. So the key point was not to copy what we did in other countries, but it was a structured learning and adaptation. Reality is not the same in Colombia or Ecuador or legal reality compared to the Peruvian one. So the replication included, the involvement of actors in the country, especially the main banana producer associations, and then, of course, gender participation and how we managed to trigger this worker feedback for all our activities. Then my colleagues talked about I was planning to just explain a little bit how we've managed to have this roundtable in the World Banana Forum, where we have from governments to retailers, going through trade unions, civil society organizations, producers, big traders like Chiquita, Dole, Del Monte, and then how the legal reality had an impact on all the activities. For those of us who were involved in this policy development, we moved from the CSDDD, from the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive into the Omnibus recently, and its implications, and frameworks such as the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and again, I will not go into details because my colleague explained this. I'm mindful of the time, but the EU requirements may evolve, but the direction of travel remains relevant for global supply chains. We were working on occupational health and safety before. Bohesi was my baby back in 2013. Back then, we did not have CSDDD. Even if we narrow down the requirements for retailers on occupational health and safety and decent work, for banana stakeholders, this matter is important. It's important for markets, and we expect that this evidence and a structured risk management, particularly on human rights and occupational health and safety, needs to be more credible, and then we need to provide more information on sustainability. So, World Banana Forum approach.
Sorry, but could you please wrap up?
Yes.
Because of the time.
So, World Banana Forum approach is to help members to stay informed without getting, parallel compliance burdens, through technical briefings, neutral dialogue, and I think that's then, mindful of the time, that's it on my end. Just the message for the audience is that the regulatory uncertainty is real, but protecting workers and strengthening occupational health and safety systems is both ethically essential and operationally smart, and it positions the sector, the banana sector, well under any plausible regulatory scenario. So I think bananas, as mentioned at the beginning, is an example on how using the banana industry, we can replicate that to other agricultural commodities. And all this information is something that we share with a series of webinars, not only activities and manuals on occupational health and safety, but also webinars on decent work, gender, occupational health and safety, prevention of child labor, social dialogue, etc., with the objective to empower stakeholders with knowledge tools, practical steps, emerging information on emerging requirements, markets, etc. So I think with this, you have information on our website. I will share the links at my colleague from the ELO, and that's it on our end. Back to you. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the 4 panelists of the session. We have one question, and I will put the questions. We have other opportunities to have questions. I'd like to mention that we have over 70 people, 70 participants in this webinar. And I'll put the question that was made to Dietmar, please, if you could answer the question. So the question is, from an economic perspective, how can small producers internalize global gap requirements without compromising profitability?
Yeah.
So Dietmar, okay, thank you.
Do you hear me? Yeah. Yeah. Thought a bit about this question. I think the producers, smaller farms, as I said, in Spain or also in Germany, they form cooperatives, and this means also they can share these compliance costs or these fees, and so they can join their forces there, and also then they have a stronger position towards supermarkets, towards buyers, and also they can integrate these systems, so the global GAP and the GRAS system. So the GRAS is more the social sustainability certification. They can integrate this with global GAP so that they have only one certification and not the double costs. And also, if they have this certification, that may allows them to, ask for higher prices or higher quality standards, to meet higher quality standards for the supermarkets.
If I can say, I think this is also a very good question for the next panel, where we have people like Sergio Barbara, who works with the Ethical Trade Forum. So maybe I can ask Christine to take that. Sandra, Dietmar, all of the speakers in this session, I'm trying to keep. I've been very grateful for these excellent presentations. So Christine is Global Policy Director at Care International. She's also a farmer's daughter, a farmer, however you want to put it, and brought up in Canada, so she knows the area very well. She's very motivated in decent work, social and gender issues, based in Geneva, and has, again, a very impressive CV, which I hope you've all read. And I'll pass over to Christine. Thank you, Christine.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you can hear me and see me okay. It seemed like I was switching a bit through from one camera to the other. Anyway, I want to thank the previous speakers for helping to set the stage with your excellent presentations. Very well done. I learned a lot. And I want to thank Alan and David for inviting me to chair this important session. I think it's going to be a bit stimulating and possibly a bit controversial, so hold on to your seats. To start us off, let's hear from Nora Gottlieb. Nora is a senior researcher from Bielefeld University, and as part of the Dignity Firm work, she focuses on the conditions of migrant workers.
Elle est chercheuse senior à l'université de Bielefeld.
I can hear the French interpreter. I'm not sure if everybody else can. I see Nora nodding. Thanks. So Nora focuses on the condition of migrant workers in European farm-to-fork labor markets. Nora. We've heard a lot about the SafeHabitus report, and the conclusions of that report emphasize that CSR often serves as reputational management rather than transformational change. What insights do you have based on your own research and the research of others?
Yeah, thank you very much, Christine. I feel like I have a relatively easy job here because I think my previous speakers have already spoken about this a little bit. At least this is what I took from many of the previous presentations. And I want to second Christine here. These were really excellent presentations. So yeah, I'm kind of drawing on what my previous speaker said. But first of all, I want to refer to the Dignity Firm research, where, as Christine said, we looked at the conditions of precariously employed migrant workers in different industries of the food supply chain industries in Europe and adjacent countries. And some of the case studies indeed indicated that the CSR and voluntary schemes can sometimes be more of a PR stunt rather than effective tools to improve the workers' conditions. I'm thinking specifically about a case study on the German meat industry, where for years and decades, there have been various attempts to improve the workers' conditions, mainly through these kind of voluntary schemes. And nothing changed on the ground for years and decades until finally, following COVID out in Germany, following COVID outbreaks in various meat plants, the government kind of drastically decided to just top-down re-regulate employment in the meat industry to tackle the problem. And yeah, well, we're not sure, like it's hard to tell yet if this has solved the problem. I have my personal opinion on it, but it's too early to say if this has solved the problem. At least it's an indication that the previous attempts before to improve workers' conditions through voluntary schemes, to self-commitment of the industry, et cetera, has worked, at least in this case. Apparently, various stakeholders had the impression that it just didn't work. So we need to take this kind of drastic step of a legal reform to kind of top-down re-regulate employment, and that's it. And we have a couple of other case studies, for instance, on delivery platforms in different countries that similarly indicate, I think, that where you have self-commitment on the one hand and powerful commercial interests on the other, the commercial interests might win. So yeah, so we're a bit critical, I think, about voluntary schemes. But I also want to say, I think this is not an either-or question. And this too has been said by the previous speakers, right? Like, I think none of the things we said, if it's a legal reform, like top-down re-regulation of employment, or if it's a CSR framework, none of these things will work on their own and alone, but I think it's more like pieces of the puzzle, and they can work together. And here I think Maria has described this example, right, of where that kind of turned a situation that maybe could be a vicious cycle of social dumping turned into a virtuous cycle where OSH played a part, but also other elements, collective bargaining, gender aspects, labor rights. So I think, yeah, as I said before, it's not an either-or question. I think they can all of these things can make a valuable contribution, and none of them on their own. Yeah, I think.
So I'm
hope this answered your question.
It was perfect, Nora. You mentioned that things haven't quite worked as well as hoped. So in your opinion, what can be improved to improve the effectiveness of such schemes?
Yeah. Yeah. So from our research, I think one like conclusion on a very like macro level, on a very bird eye level, is that ultimately among the core reasons if workers' conditions are bad and if there's high OSH risks for workers, it's great power imbalances across the food supply chain. So it's between workers and employers, or between workers and intermediaries. It's also between buyers and suppliers. And so this is hard to tackle. And as I said before, it needs to be tackled from different angles. And so I think one thing that we find in our research is that really the various kinds of precarious employment arrangements for workers, if it's seasonal work, if it's platform work, if it's like subcontracted work, like that just creates a lot of problems, because it creates fragmentations and intransparencies, like who's actually the employer, who's actually responsible, who actually has a mandate for training, for monitoring OSH, et cetera. And so this can lead exactly to the vicious cycle that I described before, and to social dumping. So I think the more you can move in direction of more direct employment and more long-term employment, I think that helps. And it also helps to establish clear lines of responsibility, like who is the employer and who has the all employer duties. And then I think another point is really to somehow integrate really meaningful mechanisms of worker participation, grievance mechanisms. Like the workers themselves should be able to say, if the framework, also if it's a voluntary scheme, if it's CSR, these frameworks too, if they work for them, they should be able to voice their assessment of it, and without fear, right? And maybe one last point, and here maybe the session becomes a bit controversial. From our research, actually, we didn't look too much into, for instance, relations between buyers and suppliers, right? But where the buyers came up in our research, they came up as actors with a lot of power, and actors that create huge price pressures on the suppliers. And the suppliers typically push those costs and risks and pressures down the supply chain. And this is how a big, contributor to, creating bad conditions for workers. And so I was wondering if a different pricing policy, buyers paying higher prices for the products, if that would maybe be a bit more effective than, on top of creating price pressures, then also creating the pressure of a framework with CSR standards or other standards. Like kind of creating this double pressure of the price pressure on the one hand and the labor conditions are on the other hand. So I'll be happy to to discuss this with the other panelists.
Great. Yeah, Nora, I'm going to come back to you on power imbalances, because that's such an important element of what we're discussing here today. And I have a few more questions about OSH, but let's turn to Sergio. Sergio Barbera is the managing director of a CSR firm called Conexión Social, and is the general secretary of the Spanish Ethical Trade Forum. My first question to you, Sergio, is that there's multiple voluntary mechanisms covering ethical production in agriculture, particularly in horticulture. Do producers suffer certification and auditing fatigue?
Oh, thank you, Christine, and thank you for the organization for the invite. Very happy to be here. And I will answer to your question, but firstly, give a very short introduction of who am I and why maybe I can help in the debate here. I'm an industrial engineer and occupational health and safety technician, working in CCR with a strong focus on migration flows linked to labor since 2003. I've been an auditor, social auditor, done around 1,000 social, environmental, and technical audits, but around 50 of them have been in the agri-food sector, and especially social audits linked to SMETA and other schemes that have been already commented here. And as you said, since 2015, I'm driving the Ethical Trade Forums. That is a collaborative multi-stakeholder initiative, which mission is ensuring to improve workers' conditions and their families, plus ensuring sustainability of the sector. So environmental, social, and also economic. And this links to Nora's comment right now around how the sector is suffering, and links also to your question, how the sector is suffering, and completely agree with Nora how this is this pressure is going down to the small grower at the end, because the pricing situation is really quite a challenge here, and this also makes it difficult to implement measures, etc., etc. OH's challenges have been there since the beginning of the forums. Many labor issues such as excessive working hours, for example, or failing to pay on-time wages have an impact on the safety and health of workers. This can be mental health, or this can apply to their safety. So we are lucky to count in every of our activities and events and working groups with excellent and experienced OSH experts who daily work in facing challenges, and because there is an usual link to this OSH prevention and conditions. Okay, answer to your questions now. Public health departments, agriculture departments, industry departments for machinery, general services, electricity, gas, labor inspections, including health and safety programs, called campaigns or similar, are there because this is the law, and this is what is done through the public authorities normally for producers, etc. But apart from all this, that is the normal part in the law in Spain, as we have heard this morning, this is mainly customer driven. As an example, global gap is widely extended. So most of growers who wish to export need to pass these audits before exporting. I would say all producers need to go through this, and all farms need to be certified global gap, for example. That's one audit there, but we have food quality, food defense, environmental. So we have other schemes such as spring, etc., etc. And then we have all the social audits. And as I heard this morning, obviously GRASP is the global gap social audit, but there are other schemes such as SMETA, driven mostly by the UK retailers, or BSCI Plus, or now called AMFORI, driven by the Central European retailers. Fair trade, little bit, because I heard about fair trade this morning also, I think. Bananas, a small production on cotton, and a growing tropical fruits production here in Spain, very little. And very, very little SA8000 that I saw in the morning. This is I would say, the only volunteer certification. I would say anyone that wishes to have a volunteer certification may go to this one, but the others are mandatory for selling in the market. If you want to be in the market, you need that type of audits. These are not certificates, most of them. They are just audit schemes. Ethics and where everything started, code of conduct audits. So this started many years ago when each of the retailers started with their own code of conduct and started auditing their supply chain in their own code of conduct. And these audits were very similar, all of them. So they decided to aggregate in schemes such as SEDEX or BSCI to reduce duplication and this audit fatigue. But still, there's a lot of audit fatigue. Because, and answering again to your question over fatigue, this applies normally to different sizes and markets. So there are different impacts on companies. A grower that wishes to sell to Germany, to UK, to Netherlands, to many countries, needs to go to different programs and add to them some programs that are imposed by their buyers. And their buyers may not be the retailer, the supermarkets. These are export companies or importers that have their own schemes. So at the end, the grower goes through the third-party audit that is imposed by the retailer, through the second-party audit that is imposed by their customer, so the buyer, okay, and then obviously through their own internal audits that need to be there and are healthy to be there. So it's really important to understand that there is a lot of pressure, there is a lot of redundancy, and there are growers that never go through an audit. This is interesting. Some people doesn't know what is an audit, a social audit, and some people is audited and have even people hired just to go through these audits, you know. So a lot of fatigue and a little bit of a mess, I would say.
Which leads me to my second question. You're mentioning a lot about auditing systems, but really, how reliable are they as mechanisms for providing the surety of compliance of buyers? And on that same, I'm going to have one more follow-up, and I know there's a question in the chat already for you, but how often does the average producer, how often are they audited, and what happens if they fault?
Okay, these are many questions in one, but I will try to answer to them. As a social auditor, I should say that they are really reliable and they really work very well. But I would say that this has been one of the challenges in the sector. As I told you before, I've done around 1,000 audits in my life. Yeah, half of them in this sector, but I may have done 3 or 2 in the petrol industry, the oil industry. I'm not an expert, even though I'm an industrial engineer. I'm not an expert in that type of audit, so I could help, but I couldn't be really to the point. Apart that an audit that may last one day. There is a lot of documents. There is a lot of interviews to be done. There is a lot of, and normally these audits don't go deep into the systemic issues in the sector. So how reliable are to fix? Not much, I would say. Some, of course, and it depends a lot in the quality and the knowledge of the auditor in the work that they are doing. When I was doing audits every single day in the sector, I was really reliable. Now I'm not a good auditor, you know, because I do too short audits. I'm good because I know the issues, I have the experience, etc. But I would hire someone that is every single day in the fields, in the farms, and doing the same type of audits. You know, what happened some years ago? That, for example, with Global Gap and GRASP, and we have discussed this with them many times, is that they started using Global Gap auditors, really good auditors, experts in environment and food safety and food defense and all these topics. They started to use them as GRASP auditors, social, labor, contracts. So that wasn't really useful at all because they were not giving value to auditees. And this changed, fortunately, when they started to train their own auditors, and also for other schemes, when they started to ask, we want APSCA auditors, those are certified social auditors or SA 8000 auditors, that are the ones that really have the skills and the training that is necessary for that. How reliable? Well, it depends on the auditor, it depends on the scheme, and also it depends on the intention of the auditee to learn from the experience, to really be transparent, or just to hide everything and make it not just pass the audit. Okay, depends on the auditor, etc., etc. Audits help, of course, are necessary, of course, but are not the only thing that has to be done.
Thank you, Sergio, for being honest with us and basing your response on your experience. Vidya, it's time for you to join the conversation. The bios are available online, but Vidya Ragan works as the Director of Policy Engagement at ECL. In this role, she oversees all of the external policy, outreach, engagement efforts with governments, policymakers, business conveners, and other stakeholders. Vidya, from your experience, do certification systems improve OSH standards in agriculture? Do we have data on this?
Thanks so much, Christine, for bringing me in. And I've heard a few times that this conversation is going to get controversial. That's probably because you're expecting me to sit here and defend schemes. Well, that's really not what ICL is about. So I'm going to really give you a perspective from where we see things. So a quick word about who we are as an organization. ICL was set up 23 years ago. We exist to bring global and national and regional sort of standard setting schemes together to learn, collaborate, improve, become interoperable. We also directly work a lot with government and business stakeholders on credibility of such schemes. And some of the schemes mentioned today are in the ICL community as members, but many are not. And I think as we go through the debate today, it's worth noting that there's close to 350, 400 voluntary schemes out there, of which not every one should be painted with the same brush, of course. On this topic, Christine, one of the things I want to say at the outset is that it's quite important to distinguish between schemes that set standards and then seek, compliance against those standards, and then organizations that only do auditing. The market is quite confused between the two. And I think it's important to separate organizations which are standard setters, which set up a framework that may include OSH or decent labor goals as part of those, vis-a-vis those that only provide, auditing services. So to your question, I was invited into the discussion today to share results from a 2024 systematic review that Evidencia, which is a public sort of access and knowledge repository that ICL's been involved with, did. This was a systematic review of evidence on understanding the impacts of market-based tools on decent work, and we focused on the agriculture and apparel sectors. And I'll put the links in the chat, but I think the big picture is that, yes, there is some data about the role that market-based tools play in driving, impacts on decent work. And they're not as statistically significant in that they're not as robust as we would like, but there are some positive outcomes that this research has pointed us to, some of which have been alluded to by previous speakers. So, for example, the review looked at 4 to 5 different categories of decent work, and of these, of the statistical data available, there were 2 outcomes on which market-based tools performed particularly better, and these were around terms and conditions of work for workers and workers' voice and representation, 2 topics that we've heard mentioned in the seminar today quite a while. That being said, there are other outcomes on which the level of change is not against expectations. For example, market-based tools alone cannot singularly drive up wages. Wages was an outcome that we studied. They cannot singularly resolve forced labor or child labor, which we all know to be deeply systemic and structural issues as well. So I think the conversation is, so the data is there. More data can be available. Existing data is heavily skewed in favor of some schemes. And I think there is a call to action for researchers to investigate more schemes, newer schemes in newer sectors. But for me, the question is really what sort of a smart mix where the best parts of what voluntary frameworks can do combined with the best parts of what the legal minimum should look like do we need to actually be driving change in very complex and international supply chains. And I say this being very conscious of the moment in time we are in now in the policy debate. I mean, look at where we are with the CSDDD and the highly watered down version that we have in front of us today. We can't put all our eggs in the policy basket either, because policy is subject to the vagaries of political winds. And so the key question that we've been discussing at ICL, both with policymakers and with schemes, is what does a smart mix look like? What do we actually do well as schemes? Where do improvements need to happen? Where do costs need to come down? And if you look at a key driving sort of impact like decent work, can we leverage the relationships that many of these schemes have with policymakers, with supply chain partners, to actually get to the core, what you call root cause analysis of where these decent work violations are actually coming into supply chains from?
Great, thank you. These aren't easy questions, but I'm getting some excellent answers. Thanks for that, Vidya. I have another question for you. In your opinion, what are the achievements of buyers, multi-stakeholder driven private compliance initiatives in improving OSH in agriculture supply chains? And are there ways to improve those systems?
Thanks, Christine. So I think at the outset, it's tempting to call these initiatives private sector driven or buyer driven, but the best of them really should not be. And if you look at what ICL's work on credibility and defining a credible system looks like, you really need to be multi-stakeholder if you really want to be driving impacts and meeting these goals that you're set out for. So while there's a temptation to think that buyers are behind a lot of them, I think it's useful to keep in mind that one way to distinguish schemes from each other is really how multi-stakeholder are they, whose voice really matters in the decision making, within the scheme. So to your question of what could we think of as the achievements of these sorts of schemes over time in the realm of decent work, I'll probably point to 3. And again, an invitation to participants to read the full 70-page report. I think the first is by nature of the fact that they're market-based, and they often connect the producer right up till the retailer. They have a touch point with everybody in the supply chain, and that's an advantage. Now, the question you can ask is this advantage being used and leveraged by these schemes to really, put in place holistic due diligence, to really do solid risk assessment? But you can't deny the fact that they're quite unique in the fact that they do have a touch point, they do bring the supply chain together. So if you want to address systemic issues, such multi-stakeholder schemes are a good way of doing it. In many sectors like palm, soy, even in coffee, that was mentioned by the ILO speaker, many of these schemes are becoming roundtables. They're actually bringing the key actors in the sector together to agree on indicators, to agree on basic guidelines. That's a role that can be leveraged better. And we're having a lot of conversations about what this multi-stakeholder role of schemes, can actually do and drive. I think the second thing is, again, if a scheme is credible and if its focus is on impact, they invest and do a lot in terms of capacity building. The job of a good scheme is not just to write standards. That's really only the starting of the journey. A lot of these schemes have on-the-ground presence, either directly themselves or through implementing partners, where they build capacity with smallholders, with SMEs and others to actually help understand what the standard is about, why a certain requirement has been set, and then build capacity to meet that requirement. And that being said, many standards also set as continuous improvement frameworks. That learning is an important one because these started off as compliance checkbox approaches, but now have integrated that learning and really take a stepwise approach as well. And I think this investment in capacity building is important, especially when you consider that in many sort of agrarian economies, governments and agricultural extension services may not have the capacity to provide that sort of on-the-ground, support to farmers. The third, I would say, is that, and I think Sergio spoke to this very lucidly in his intervention, that audits are not perfect, audits are burdensome, but audits do play a role, especially in regimes with very poor enforcement records. So the question you need to ask is not, do we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater? The question is, what needs to be done to align audits, to share audit data, to improve data governance, to improve interoperability between the very wide and growing range of schemes that you have? Audits still play a role. In the research that we did, and if you sort of go to the field and ask, let's say, tea plantation workers or banana plantation workers, do they feel they're better off if they're visited once a year by an auditor from a third-party audit, or if they're just left at the mercy of labor inspectors, from the national governments? You will get a pretty clear answer. So I would say the fact that you have this mechanism that in sort of weaker compliance or enforcement jurisdictions allows for a checkpoint, allows for sort of an eye, on what's happening in terms of labor and, core ILO conventions. Those are the three main points that I would highlight in terms of achievements. There's a lot that can be done to improve the way schemes work. And in large part, that's the goal of why ICL exists as well. I think to look at some of the key recommendations that we've put out in the research that I mentioned, one very important one, and Victor from the World Banana Forum and others said, is that we do have the opportunity to look at how schemes can speak to each other a little better in terms of audit integration or at something like mutual recognition. Everybody talks about multiplicity, but there are simple ways that you can get around this. In the coffee sector, one of the ICL members, Global Coffee Platform, adopts a mutual recognition approach with other schemes in the coffee sector, so that if a producer has been audited by one of them, Global Coffee Platform will recognize that audit. That's a good way. That's an innovation that's really going to make a difference to a lot of producers. The second, I would say, in decent work is really auditor competency. ICL's also done a lot of work on social auditing specifically. Sergio spoke to this. It's not the same as figuring out what pesticide usage is or what good agroeconomic practices are. You need to have simple things in place like a joint gender-balanced audit team. You need to have ability to triangulate data, look at what you're getting from documentation from management, compare that with what you're getting with worker voice tools, and then do your own interviews. No single source is going to give you the single truth you're after. So you need to have the capabilities as a scheme and system to triangulate data regularly. And I think schemes can innovate on that front. And the third, and maybe the most important one, is I think on the price and wages. I think several people have spoken to the fact that it's very easy to think of the fact that, oh, I'm expecting this, smallholder farm or estate to really be driving these sorts of occupational health and safety improvements. I need X, Y, and Z protective equipments in place, or committees to be set up, or policies to be reinstated, or trainings to be done. I think the question you need to ask is, at what point is the consumer also happy to start paying a little bit more to see that sustainability outcome achieved in the supply chain? Nora spoke to the fact that we can't beat around the bush, that agricultural supply chains suppress prices significantly. And a question that we often hear from our members is, in many retail markets, especially in Europe, products like bananas and tea are loss leaders, which means you are enticing the consumer into the supermarket by keeping extremely low prices for bananas and tea in the invitation that they will put other products into their basket. But that downward pressure on prices is ultimately going to result in a downward pressure and a sort of negation of rights and decent work abuses, whether that's overtime in the case of the apparel sector, or contractization, feminization of the workforce in the case of agriculture. So this project is an excellent opportunity to really talk about what does collective responsibility for every actor look like. We want producers and certifiers to do their bit, but we also want accountability to make sure that the right price dynamics create incentives for change.
Yeah. Thanks for that video. Excellent. Nora, I'm going to get back to you, and I appreciate that the responses from Sergio and Vidya have been very rich. So feel free to reflect and add in your response. As your chair, I'm resisting doing that, but as speakers, you're most welcome to do that. The question I did have for you, and again, feel free to answer or reflect, was you mentioned grievance mechanisms. So how do these power imbalances in supply chains exacerbate OSH risks, especially for migrant and seasonal workers? And what governance practice could mitigate these vulnerabilities?
Okay. Wow, there are lots of ways, and I'm not going to give you an exhaustive list. I'm just going to give you a few examples off the top of my head. For instance, let's say a worker is paid by piece, or let's say a worker is paid by piece, or for reaching a certain quota on the same day, then he or she will, for instance, prioritize speed and efficiency over safety. And if it takes time to put on more safety equipment or to put on some, safety mechanism on the machine, and he or she will forego it if it slows her or him down. That's one thing. Another example, maybe like if you're easy to be laid off, if you just have a short-term contract or kind of seasonal contract or some other contract that is very easy to terminate without proper reason, then you will not be in a position to demand better protection, to demand better conditions. Yeah, I think there are there's so many, there are many examples like how the workers' precarity increases OSH risks. Yeah, you're not going to be able, if you're easily dismissed, or if, say, if you have to fear employer reprisal, say in terms of, dismissal is maybe drastic, but maybe wage deductions. And again, you're not going to be able to, to speak out against the employer or to speak about violations of labor standards in your workplace. yeah, you're just gonna, like, in the end, I think all of these things kind of work in a way that disciplines the worker, that makes a worker a kind of docile worker. And that works to the benefit of the employer very often, right? It increases the power differences between the worker and the employer. And so also, if you, as a worker, if you know that in case that you fall ill, or if you have, let's say, if you're injured, if you know that you're not going to be able to access rights, like if you're not going to be able to access healthcare, you're not going to get paid sick leave, you're not going to be able to get any like rehabilitation or compensation, then again, you're kind of have the goodwill of your employer, and so it's kind of, yeah, as I just mentioned before, it kind of creates this vicious cycle between worker precarity and great OSH risks, and that again increases the workers' precarity and dependency on the employer. So it's really kind of a vicious cycle between precarity and OSH risks. We have, like, I think Tessotia put a couple of reports, links to reports in the chat. So if you want a more systematic answer to how worker precarity relates to OSH risks, I think it's in some of our working papers for the Dignity Firm project.
Yeah, thanks for that. And there's a lot of good publications in the chat. I'm trying to capture them all, but my request to the organizers is please send out all the links in an email to all of us in case we've missed a few. Nora, I'm coming back to you. You mentioned that if workers are ignored, it creates a docile and very compliant environment. Do you have any other examples where such systems are not achieving their objectives to improve OSH standards? And is there room for improvement? What would you do?
Say it again. I didn't fully get the question.
Sure. So you had mentioned that if workers are ignored, it creates a docile and very compliant environment. So do you have any other examples where such systems are not achieving their objectives to improve OSH standards? And if you had a magic wand, what would you do to improve the system?
So you're asking me about different industries, different contexts, or?
Yeah, feel free to respond from your area of expertise.
I mean, I'm kind of thinking that on a principle level, in all the industries that we looked at, this kind of vicious circle existed between worker precarity and OSH risk. So we looked at food supply chains. And in many cases, workers have faced this multiple precarity. Often they were from migrant or marginalized populations. So they have faced, some of them faced, for instance, legal precarity. They faced work precarity because they were, they had like employment arrangements that did not provide job security, that did not provide full access to OSH rights, that did not provide like options to unionize or to organize. So they faced often other factors come in, like gender inequalities or racialization, like belonging to a certain ethnic group or whatever. So workers were in a position of multiple precarity. And this kind of made them exploitable, like it put them in a position that allowed employers to dodge responsibilities for OSH, or that also kind of made it inconsequential if OSH standards were violated. And we saw this, well, Dignity Firm looked at, as I said, at different industries in the food supply chain. So we looked at agriculture, we looked at meat processing, fishery, hospitality, delivery riders. I mean, platform work is really like this emerging topic in the field, like looking from public health, looking from occupational health. So there's a lot of talk about platformization, about platform work in different industries that creates exactly these risks. And so I think it's a pattern that we saw in all of these industries. But I think I'm sure there's also, if you look into other sectors, I mean, another sector, I think in Europe that is coming out a little bit in the debate is logistics and parcel delivery, for instance. You see the same patterns. So yeah, I guess it's generally industries that seek workers at low pay with relatively, and that don't need a high level of formal skill. And so I think these sectors are kind of prone to creating these conditions. This would be my general answer to your question.
Great. Yeah, thanks. And I want to thank my speakers. We are keeping perfectly to time, which means we actually get time to answer some of the questions that we've received in the chat. So I'm going to read out the ones that I have captured and maybe nominate one of each of you to answer them, and we'll have one last round of questions, and then I think we're back on schedule, Ellen. So the first question, which was from the last session, I think this is best placed for you, Sergio. It says, from an economic perspective, how can small producers internalize global GAP requirements without compromising profitability? I'm going to pause there and then give all the questions so you guys have a bit of time to think about the answer. Another question that came in, and maybe it's good for Vidya, to what extent does fair profit and income distribution along the agriculture supply chain influence the capacity of small producers to invest in OSH improvements, such as training for their workforces? Is this just an excuse? And there are two more questions that came in, and I'm just going to put them out there. Nora, you decide if you want to answer them or reflect on what was said before you. What is the role of consumers in the success of such systems, or do retailers merely use such systems to reinforce their corporate image and avoid liabilities? And the last question was, I think we've responded to, and previous speakers have, but I'm going to read it out. Do certification systems improve OSH standards in agriculture? And do we have data on this? I think you gave some good examples already. But Sergio, if you don't mind that first question about the economic perspective. Thanks for your background.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, when we see the issues that are related to a lack of health and safety compliance, it is mostly linked to also a lack of health and safety culture in companies. Okay, there is lack of understanding of some of the requirements. There is a lack of maybe local law or a different local law in place where these requirements are being included. I'm talking about global gap and other, let's say, grasp better than global gap in terms of OSH, okay? And lack of solutions available for the small amount of resources there, and this is one of the part of the answer. But I would like to focus a little bit on the need of working on building a health and safety preventative culture, okay? We try to do this with a couple of points that are really important. Sharing best practices related to different topics, ergonomic practices, psychosocial risk, access to grievance mechanisms, social dialogue workshops. Our first guidances back in 2018 were on housing premises and labor conditions, but always with one way of doing things. Instead of doing them from top to down, we did them from bottom to top, okay? So what we did is develop these guidances, bring in their workers representatives, growers, small growers, cooperatives, obviously importers also in the discussion. So those guidances were made by the ones that needed to comply with them. So there was an implicit commitment to comply because they were the ones that were designing and building those guidances with the opinion and the participation also of stakeholders, unions, NGOs, etc., etc. So answering to your question, what could be done? Okay, let's go to this CSDDD or what is coming now. Audits paid by customers. Why not? Because there's a cost here. Okay, why don't we include this and we comply with it? It is value for the product and it is useful for the product, and also it may make our customers to reach this type of agreements that are already there in place in terms of avoiding duplication, so a wider range is reached. So I accept your audits because I want to reach other suppliers in my supply chain. You are already reaching to this supplier that is my own supplier. And finally, I'm very linked to what we do. We need to include our stakeholders and their concerns in the process of strategic building of all that has to do with all our social compliance, including OSH. Okay, so dialogue with the stakeholders is key. And that's how, for example, we've built our grievance mechanism. Talking about grievance mechanism, I would like to finish with this. We consulted our stakeholders. We built a grievance mechanism for all the sector that is really cheap or even free for small growers under 50 workers. So it's very easy for them to implement. I mean, very easy because we do the work. We train their workers, and very important, we go to the farms, we visit the workers, and we tell them their rights and how to use this grievance mechanism. If there is no direct contact with workers and participation with workers, these things sometimes don't reach to them, okay, and stay there. So really important to create this culture, not only in workers, but also in middle managers and leaders of companies. The culture of preventative health and safety, okay, occupational health and safety. So this is more or less the message to finish. Try to work on best examples, also collaborating in the sector and go down to where the roots are, where the issues are, and where the concerns are, to listen the difficulties to apply and why this sometimes is not working well. Okay.
Great, thanks for that, Sergio. Vidya, back to you. The question was, to what extent does fair price and income distribution along the agriculture supply chain influence the capacity of small producers to invest in OSH improvements, such as training of their workforce? Is this just an excuse?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. So I think in order to really understand this question, you have to separate two very different production models because very different dynamics apply in them. If you're looking at sort of an estate-based, so large farm-based, agrarian setup, you should have very different expectations there for what management, estate owners are able to do with regard to workers. It should be categorized as a sort of more formal working structure. The most important problem you end up having there in many countries is power sort of capture by the management, poor working and worker rights and awareness of rights by workers, and this complete hierarchy and feudal structure in place, which prevents, better workers' rights and decent work from being realized because the management is trying to, potentially one could argue the management is not investing enough. Vis-a-vis, I think, agrarian setups that are smallholder focused, where the production model is extremely different. Now, if you are in a smallholder setup, you are using your own land. You are choosing to grow on that land some proportion of cash crop or export crop and use the rest for subsistence farming. And if you're talking about the cash crop here, because that's probably what gets exported into these international supply chains, it's agrarian, it's seasonal. You will require some labor for certain parts of the growing cycle. You will probably hire from your village. You will be probably hire from migrant workers from close by villages who will travel in. And the key question there is, it is possible to think that there is a perverse incentive for small farmers to not pay their workers. But really, is that going to benefit them in the long run? These workers are then not going to come back. Farmers are completely dependent on them. Of course, one can say there's cultural, caste, or other reasons as to why a particular community ends up being landless worker communities. And there you're talking about structural problems. But by and large, I think in smallholder setups, you have to ensure that in smallholder farming, the right economic thresholds are met so that the smallholder farmer can pay those higher wages. It is not necessarily the case that they want workers who are working on their farms to walk around without footwear or to not be aware, to live in slave-like conditions. So I would say that in order to understand the real importance of where fair profit and price distribution is an important pathway, in smallholder setups, it's imperative. Without that, without creating the right economic incentives for smallholder farmers to actually gain profitably from agriculture and then invest in training and better occupational health and safety standards, you're not going to see that go up. But that alone is not enough. You have to understand the society within which smallholder production takes place. You have to understand potentially structural and systemic barriers so that marginalized landless workers don't become further marginalized, right? Even as a result of any training that you do. But in larger setups, suppose they're factories or estates, you can have higher standards because these are semi-formal to formal setups where managements should be putting in place much better training for middle management, the unionization of workers, sort of freedom of association, collective bargaining have proven academic results in terms of what they do for strengthening workers' voice and workers' rights. And maybe a last thing to say that in no situation, in no sector, should collective bargaining and freedom of association be a nice to have. It's a must have. In fact, coming from India, where I sit, there's a huge movement around the gig economy workers and the precariousness that they face because the industry will not allow them to organize. It's no surprise that what we consider to be problems in faraway sectors like agriculture and bananas and coffee is now manifesting itself, in the service applications we all use. So I would say that, and this is where I think the role of market tools is somewhat encouraging from our research. They do have the potential to help workers organize, to put in place multi-stakeholder setups where management, unions, and workers are speaking to each other. And if that goes well, that is a long-term pathway to actually improving workers' rights, awareness of rights, and the manifestation of those rights, really, in terms of outcomes.
Thanks for that, Vidya. Nora, as our first and last speaker of today, you're bookending our session. So give us an espresso shot to wake everybody up and make sure they're ready for the next panel session. What are the last idea you would like to leave us with for today?
Oh, wow, that's a big responsibility. But I would like to come back to your question about the role of the consumers. And to be honest, I don't like this question very much. This is maybe also because I have a background in human rights work. So I don't like looking at the, role of the private person and his or her responsibility. I think about state responsibility. Also, I think if we think about other things we said now and the food supply chain and price policy, I don't think that the private consumer is where the big profits lie or the benefit of everything. I mean, if we pay 5 cents less for the banana, but that's not the big profit here. And I don't think that this is where the responsibility lies. I think other actors still make very nice profit margins given the current price policy. So I don't think that necessarily if you pay higher prices to suppliers, you necessarily need to massively increase prices for the consumers. That's one thing. And I think ultimately the responsibility for workers' conditions lies with employers and they lie with states. And so I think what we should be maybe, let's say in a European setting, what we should be infuriated about is that, like Vidya just said, it's very apparent if you follow recent EU policy making that workers' rights are still treated as a luxury because they were more on the table only recently with several directives about the due diligence in supply chains and et cetera, and every time there's a crisis, every time there is something else comes up, and the first thing that drops off the political agenda is social sustainability and worker rights. And I think this is where we should, this is what we should be angry about, not the individual consumer. And this is where I think, we should start working on from the top, not from the bottom.
Perfect. Thank you. You're getting thumbs up on the screen. At least I see them from my view. I want to thank again the speakers for the excellent and very honest reality check of what it is that we're dealing with in the sector. I want to thank the organizers for inviting us to be a part of this important session. I learned a lot already today, and I look forward to our next session. As as Alun mentioned at the beginning, ILO Care and EFAD lead a coalition called Decent Work for Equitable Food Systems Coalition. I will put a link in the chat in case you want to get involved in more conversations like this. SafeHabitus is a member, for example. And Alun, I'm turning the floor back to you to lead us through the policy discussion roundtable. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, Christine. It's always a pleasure to cooperate with your organization and all of the other partners, and we're very grateful for that. We're now going to move to the policy session. So all the problems are going to be sorted out by the policy makers and the policy shapers. That's what I call them in this session. And what I will do, I will start by presenting just briefly the panel. I won't go into too much detail again. And Anna Maria, if you could put the link into the bio so I don't have to go into too much detail. But first, I'd like to welcome and thank the MEP Eric Sargiacomo, Vice President of the European Parliament Agricultural Committee. He's a member of the Socialist Group in the committee. He although on the Agri Committee, he is very much involved in social development and workers' rights in both agriculture and fisheries. And he's very motivated and shares, I think, many of the feelings of this panel. Then I'd like to mention Stoyan Chukhanov, who is the president, the chair of the agricultural section, more or less, the panel of the European Economic and Social Committee. He's a farmer from Bulgaria, and he's the president of the Beef Breeders Association in Bulgaria. Thank you, Stoyan, as well. I'd also like to welcome Claudia Merlino, who is the president of the Agricultural Employers for Europe. It's called GEOPA, and it's the European Employers. She's been very busy last week, so we thank her for taking her time. And so was Eric, very much in Strasbourg. I think everybody was very busy, and they can tell you a bit about that. So thank you, Claudia, for joining us. And she is the president of the Italian National, she leads the Italian National Association for Farmers, or is one of the top managers. Then we have Enrico Somalia, who is the Agricultural Trade Union representative, General Secretary, and he's part of the E2UC, which is the trade union movement, very much working on social conditionality and other things. And he's been working for many years at EFAT. EFAT is the name of the organization. And then we have Marianges Fortuny, who is joining us from the ILO, and she has the unenviable task of dealing with forestry, agriculture, construction, and tourism. So all of the key sectors, and covering all of those, and all very interesting sectors and high risk. So thank you, Marianges. She's been at the ILO for several years, leading sectoral policies, and she's also has a lot of experience in North Africa and Central Europe. So thank you, everybody. This session, we're going to give each of the key speakers 4 minutes to make a brief statement, and then we'll go into a Q&A. And we'll try and take Q&A from the audience as we can, but we have some pre-agreed questions to make it more fluid. But I will ask, first of all, Eric, s'il vous plaît, Eric, si vous pouvez commencer. On sera ravis
merci beaucoup pour l'organisation de ce workshop. Merci beaucoup, Alun, pour la motivation qui est la vôtre sur ces sujets, parce que je crois que c'est, comme l'a dit une intervenante juste avant, c'est des fois des choses qui sont un peu passées sous silence lorsqu'on imagine des textes communautaires, et je crois que c'est au contraire quelque chose qui doit être au centre de notre réflexion lorsque on pense l'agriculture en particulier. La problématique de la santé et de la sécurité au travail, et spécialement en agriculture, elle me concerne directement en tant que député européen, et comme vous l'avez dit, je siège en commission agriculture, mais aussi en pêche. Donc, Je l'ai dit souvent en pêche, on s'occupe souvent de ce que l'on pêche, mais rarement de ceux qui pêchent. C'est un peu pareil en agriculture, on s'occupe souvent de ceux que l'on cueille, mais peu de ceux qui cueillent. La santé au travail, c'est un sujet important, mais pas simplement pour les agriculteurs. Je crois que là aussi, on a tendance à penser souvent agriculteurs et on oublie des fois les salariés qui sont de plus en plus nombreux à être dans les champs. Et évidemment, aussi quelque chose de très particulier au monde agricole, c'est l'importance du travail saisonnier. Le travail de champ, ça a toujours été un travail dur. Et on sait que les conditions de travail, ils sont durs, je veux dire, comme dans d'autres filières que l'on connaît, le bâtiment et autres. Mais pour autant, je pense qu'il faut prendre en compte les changements qui s'imposent à nous et qui le rendent encore plus dur pour les conditions de travail. Je pense notamment au réchauffement climatique qui entraîne des pics de chaleur qui ne concernent pas simplement aujourd'hui les territoires que l'on connaît, qui sont habitués à ces grandes chaleurs estivales et qui sont aussi directement concernées par la production agricole. Donc, je ne veux pas dire qu'elles n'en souffrent pas, mais elles sont plus à même, on va dire, de réagir. Elles ont des process qui prennent en compte ce genre, ou devraient prendre en compte ce genre de situation exceptionnelle. Et on s'aperçoit qu'aujourd'hui, ça peut toucher des régions qui n'étaient pas du tout touchées par ce genre de crise climatique et de pics de chaleur. Nous avons connu, par exemple, dans la région Champagne, dans nos vignes, des décès lors de la campagne de 2023 qui ont posé question sur les conditions et sur la façon dont on anticipait ces risques-là au niveau du travail dans les champs. Je crois qu'il est important, alors bien sûr, on parle toujours de moyens coercitifs, mais il est très important de sensibiliser les employeurs à cette nouvelle donne. Et il me semble également indispensable d'adapter le droit du travail dans un certain nombre de régions pour qu'on évite ces drames, parce que si on ne le fait pas, ils seront de plus en plus courants. Le second point qui me semble important, et je crois qu'il faut alerter aussi l'ensemble du monde agricole, que ce soit les agriculteurs comme les salariés, c'est les risques liés à toute l'utilisation des produits phytosanitaires. Car il faut le rappeler, souvent on pense aux consommateurs lorsqu'on parle des produits phytosanitaires, mais la première population qui est concernée par l'utilisation de ces produits et qui est victime de ces produits, ce sont les agriculteurs et les ouvriers agricoles. Donc là, je crois que même si évidemment on voudrait tous que l'agriculture biologique prenne une part extrêmement importante, et je sais que c'est le cas dans un certain nombre de pays de l'Union européenne, c'est l'ensemble de l'agriculture qu'il faut amener à avoir des pratiques qui vont sur la limitation, mais aussi la protection des salariés quand ils sont au champ. Et quel que soit le pays et quelle que soit la condition des salariés, y compris les salariés saisonniers. Améliorer les conditions de travail des travailleurs agricoles, c'est une tâche, je crois, sans fin. Et surtout, il ne faut pas la passer sous silence. Il faut qu'elle soit permanente dans l'ensemble des textes qu'on est amené à élaborer, que ce soit les règlements PAC, les organisations communes de marché, les organisations de producteurs. Il faut toujours imaginer qu'il y a des gens derrière. Nous sommes avec de l'humain et l'humain avec la nature. Mais ne pas oublier que là-dedans, il y a des salariés et on n'aura pas de durabilité si on ne s'occupe pas évidemment de l'environnement, évidemment de l'efficacité économique, mais également de l'aspect social. Et le développement durable, c'est évidemment autour de ce triptyque qu'il faut l'imaginer. La responsabilité sociale des entreprises, elle doit permettre d'avancer sur ce sujet-là. Et de ce point de vue-là, moi, j'ai très mal vécu le recul que l'on a mis en place avec Omnibus 1 et sous couvert, on va dire, de simplification, où finalement on s'est exempté de choses qui paraissent évidentes. On l'a imaginé pour des chaînes de valeur qui sont à l'échelle planétaire, mais je crois que la responsabilité qui incombe à l'ensemble des employeurs dans une chaîne de valeur, elle doit être également sur le territoire européen. Et on sait très bien qu'entre celui qui cueille une orange et celui qui boit son jus d'orange, il faut tenir en compte tous les éléments de responsabilité. Pas simplement l'agriculteur et son personnel qui est responsable. Il y a aussi la distribution, il y a aussi les transformateurs qui, avec la pression qu'ils mettent sur les prix, sur les conditions sociales amène aussi à des situations qui sont inconcevables pour un État développé. Alors, lorsqu'on veut être un modèle, comme l'Europe veut être un modèle à l'échelle mondiale en termes de développement et de durabilité, je crois qu'on ne peut pas mettre l'aspect social de côté. Et on ne peut pas accepter chez nous des systèmes de travail qui s'apparentent à du travail forcé, voire pire dans un certain nombre de cas. Nous devons être exempts de tout reproche par rapport à ce qui peut se passer dans un certain nombre de nos champs. Et encore une fois, j'en culpabilise pas les seuls agriculteurs, et c'était l'intérêt d'ailleurs de ce texte-là, de permettre de responsabiliser l'ensemble de la chaîne de valeur. Ça me paraît un élément déterminant de responsabiliser tout le monde. Et je voudrais terminer sur le label de commerce équitable, qui est aujourd'hui le label qui apporte le plus de garanties aux consommateurs quant aux conditions de production, mais aussi en répartition de la valeur. Et je crois que c'est un élément essentiel. C'est une approche globale, systémique, avec une organisation d'un certificateur externe. Et vous savez que pour l'instant, cette certification externe, c'est un des points manquants. Et je crois que là aussi, d'un point de vue social, c'est important que parmi les critères d'évaluation de cette équitabilité, il y ait également la certification extérieure et que l'on prenne en compte les critères sociaux pour cette certification. Donc voilà, en quelques mots, ce sur quoi je voulais intervenir, mais il y aurait tellement à dire sur tellement de choses. J'imagine qu'on y reviendra avec les questions. Merci beaucoup.
Je vais rendre un petit peu l'ordre. Eric, vous devez partir, si je comprends bien, pour une vote. Dans la plénière, vous avez quelques
Oui.
minutes. Donc, je vais vous poser une question sur la directive CSR qui a été réouverte il y a quelques mois pour être assez largement réduit, diminué. Ce ne sont pas mes mots, ce sont des mots. Voilà. En tant que membre de la commission jury, qui est la commission de droit juridique du Parlement, vous avez été au premier loge de cette évolution malheureuse. Malheureuse, c'est pas mes mots, mais c'est un mot qui a été proposé. Pouvez-vous nous dire ce que, malgré tout, cette directive pourra apporter à une meilleure prise en compte des conditions de travail pour les travailleurs agricoles?
Alors, je vais essayer de voir les choses de façon positive, même si je fais partie de ceux qui ont été très critiques par rapport à l'objectif de cet omnibus et finalement l'accord qui a été trouvé dessus. Je trouve qu'on est très, très en retrait. Je veux dire que le principal côté positif, c'est que la loi existe encore. On n'a pas complètement éliminé la CSRD. Mais elle est particulièrement allégée et je pense que la directive demeure pourtant un outil important pour améliorer la transparence concernant les conditions de travail des grandes entreprises et y compris dans le secteur agricole. Dans le cas qui nous intéresse, par exemple, les grandes coopératives agricoles européennes, telles que la coopérative laitière néerlandaise Friesland Campina ou la coopérative suédoise Lantmännen, seront tenues par une obligation de reporting qui inclut des indicateurs sociaux et qui crée indirectement une pression positive vers une meilleure pratique. Mais évidemment, moi je suis pour que petit à petit, c'est comme sur la conditionnalité sociale dont vous allez parler, mais il faut renforcer ces textes-là. Alors, c'est un premier pas, ils existent encore, mais je crois qu'il est important de dire que ça fait partie de notre modèle. Je crois que l'Europe ne pourra pas progresser, ne pourra pas perdurer si elle ne tient pas en compte l'efficacité économique d'un côté et l'efficacité sociale de son modèle. L'un ne va pas sans l'autre. Et donc, l'efficacité sociale, c'est évidemment les conditions de travail des gens dans les entreprises et en matière agricole, que ce soit celle des agriculteurs comme celle des salariés agricoles, ça me paraît une évidence.
Merci, Eric, et on vous remercie pour prendre le temps d'être avec nous ce matin. On va être en contact pour le suivi de ce séminaire.
Avec plaisir.
Donc, merci beaucoup. Donc, cette directive a été mentionnée par Victor Prada aussi ce matin et que même la FAO et d'autres partenaires, ils ont été très actifs dans ce processus et je pense que ça va continuer. Et comme il a dit Eric, je pense qu'il y a une envie de la part du Parlement européen de rouvrir ou de continuer à travailler sur ce dossier, d'améliorer cette directive. I will pass now to Stoyan. Thank you, Eric. Stoyan, please, if you could make a difficult to make 4-minute statement on all of this wonderful information, but please, we're listening. I think you're on mute, Stoyan. We can't hear you. No. No. There's no sound. Stoyan, maybe. No. So what I'll do, if that's okay, Stoyan, we'll try and sort that out with you offline. And if I could pass to Claudia Merlino for her brief statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alun. Do you hear me?
Perfectly, thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Alun, and I would like to thank the organizer for this invitation, which gives us the opportunity to bring the voice of farmers and agricultural employers into this debate, addressing issues that are crucial to the survival of our sector and to its future. So we warmly welcome today's discussion in the framework of SafeHabitus project, of which, you know, we are fully committed partners. So just a few words about JELPA, a very short introduction. JELPA is the European organization representing agricultural employers and farmers. And we bring together national agricultural employers organization from around 22 EU member states, representing collectively around 1 million agricultural enterprise and obviously their interest within the EU. And we are recognized together with EFAT by the European Commission as the employer side in the Sectoral Social Dialogue Committee for Agriculture. So we are entitled to the social dialogue in agriculture. So this is JELPA. A very few words also about the statement on the topic that we are discussing today. So from our perspective, the evidence, the discussion, and the data presented today confirms what farmers experience on a daily basis. Working condition, occupational safety and health, social sustainability in agriculture cannot be separated from the way markets function. This is one pillar. And European farmers operate under some of the highest labor, OSH, and environmental standards in the world. We already know that. They are fully committed to compliance, but compliance comes at a cost. Everything costs. So in this cost, if this cost is not recognized and fairly, I would like to say fairly shared along the supply chain, the risk is that responsibilities shift always onto those with the weakest bargaining power. This is one of the topics that we are discussing today. And the discussion today clearly shows that ethical trade mechanisms and corporate social responsibility commitments and certification schemes can support better working conditions only, there are conditions only if they are coherent with purchasing practices, fair prices, and realistic delivery conditions. So otherwise, the risk become formal. A lot of the former speakers said, paper-based exercise that do not translate into real improvements for workers. So I would like just to conclude from JELPA perspective, the key challenge for EU policies is therefore to align regulation, market mechanism, and trade policies so that attractive work, OSH, and competitiveness reinforce each other rather than come into conflict. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm going to go back to Stoyan now. If you can speak, Stoyan, and see if your camera works as well.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Alon, can you hear me now?
Not very high, but
Wait a minute, I'm going to go through settings.
I think it's very low.
It's very low, but you can hear me. Okay. Is
Well,
it better this way?
Perfect.
All right. Okay. Well, we depend on technology, what to say. All right. So, first of all, j'ai voulu dire que c'est très difficile de parler après Eric, mais déjà il est parti. Donc, c'est bon maintenant. Well, thanks for the invitation, Alun. It's not just very interesting for myself as a farmer, but it's very important for us as a committee to participate in this debate. And just a couple of words, the European Economic and Social Committee is the house of the civil society, and we are representing a variety of civil society organizations in three groups. So we have the group one is the employers, group two is the trade unions, and group three, to which I belong, is the civil society organizations. So our added value is actually the consensus on the different topics, the legislative proposals or the referrals that are coming from the Commission or from the Parliament, and our consensus on the topic. So we have our debate here, and of course it's not easy to build up an opinion that it's on many very, very controversial topics sometimes. So we are not politically elected here. We are just elected by our own organizations. In my case, I'm representing farmers from Bulgaria. So our section is, the NAT section, it's agriculture, rural development, and environment. So it's responsible for the broad range of issues. And one of them is the CAP, but also food sustainability, fisheries, environmental protection, and circular economy. So the topics on today's meeting, it's really the key for us, because it's really so important to find a balance for the farmers, but also for the seasonal workers, because you can presume big portion of the European migrant and seasonal workers are coming from my own country. So it's really difficult, not only mine, but Bulgaria and Romania. So they are flooding here during the seasons. So I'm facing double issues, basically, because they are leaving the fields from the south to come, and it's a big question mark for the Eastern European farmers how to attract those seasonal workers to stay there, because we need them also on the other side of European Union. That's European Union. I'm not speaking about the people coming from outside, but those are very, very tricky issues, especially when we have to deal about the health issues that are connected to this. I'm just coming out from another meeting, and it's amazing because strange data, 2.4 billion people around the world, actually, mostly in the developing countries, are spending more on the digital media than on the health insurance or on the health-related issues. And I can observe this in my own country. Many of the workers there, they have a up-to-date cell phone, the last possible version, but they don't have health insurance. And confronted in the farm and the working on the field, it's tremendously important, because especially with the climate change, we have so many cases of really consequence of this overheating, and it's impossible to react in time because sometimes the distance is so wide. So the situation of social protection of social workers, it's very important as well for us, because we have to take into account how they're going to rest in order to perform this, what they are supposed to be there. So we have few opinions, but maybe I'm going to focus a little bit later on but just recently, last week, we adopted an opinion on the CAP post-2027, which it's actually, again, supporting that the CAP subsidies should be more conditional in respect to social targets. So, and we have also opinions on the ongoing midterm evaluation on the CAP. And again, on the One Health, because we consider also part of the One Health position. And again, just to mention that we are cooking few opinions on the simplification, so-called, which we kind of try to express ourselves that simplification doesn't mean deregulation. And we have a couple of opinions on the CMO and the fair price distribution, which is very important because basically the pressure that it's coming from the large participants finally ends up to the most vulnerable that are at the base of the pyramid, and those are farmers and the farm workers. So I guess 4 minutes, I know you're starting looking a little bit nervous, but I'm looking forward for the debate. It's very important for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Stoyan. I just want to clarify for everybody that the CMO is the Common Market Organization mechanism, and also Eric is involved in that in the European Parliament. He's a rapporteur in one, I think, the jury committee, and it's very important. And this might sound like Eurospeak, but it is basically about how the markets work and the prices and the power balances in those markets, which is at the heart of this discussion today. So they're very important issues that Stoyan just mentioned, and I thought it's very technical for non-EU people.
I'm sorry, my apologies, but because we are so used to already to this Brussels language, but I hope, because I can see Enrico, I saw Claudia, so I hope they understand me very, very clearly, because those are partners that we've been working and they're also present here in our committee all the time. So I'm sorry. Yeah, Common Market Organization. That's a very important, actually, legislation in the European Union, because it tackles exactly the mandatory contracts now. That was the proposal. Because in many cases, especially the small farmers, they work without any written contract. So could you imagine this? It's just impossible they're really very vulnerable to the processors and to the market power, because without the contract, it's impossible. But in many cases, they have a total turnaround less than 5,000 euros or total cost of the production. So, it's difficult to explain. I'm sorry for the CMO.
No, it's just we have a lot of people from outside the European Union, from FAO and other organizations. So it's great to repeat those messages. Thank you, Stoyan. And now we'll pass to Enrico for his 4 minutes. And a lot has been mentioned about the multi-actors in the supply chain and the different, not just the supermarkets, but the other actors. And I think the trade unions are one of the key actors. Enrico, you mentioned also in your bio even about social sustainability, social conditionality. Please tell us more.
Yes, thank you very much, Alun, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. Well, let's use these 4 minutes a bit to give the overall picture. I think a lot has been said. That the reason why we are here is because we know that agriculture is indeed, unfortunately, one of the most precarious and challenging sector of the economy for working people. I want to be very clear, we have a lot of good examples, of course, but if you look at the overall general indicators, it is a sector where we have higher levels of precarious employment, a much higher level of undeclared work, or under-declared work. We are around 30% at European level on average. Poor health and safety standards, lack of social security for many seasonal workers, particularly in some countries, poor housing standards for mobile and migrant workers. This is the context that as trade unions we are reporting since decades. Is a context that is getting even worse, that became even worse in the last few decades, and I think we have to wonder why. Yeah, why is this the case? Why is agriculture a sector so challenging and so complicated for working people? And I think the main reason are multiple. It's a sector that has long-standing systemic issues. It's a sector that has a major misconception, and it is the fact that we believe that is a sector without a poor sector of the economy. In reality, the whole agro-food chain is a chain where a lot of health and wealth is generated. But it is a sector where there are major problems, for example, of concentration, major problem of financializations, major problems linked to wealth distribution. And in this respect, I totally agree with what Claudia said. There is also a problem linked to cheap food. Cheap food is a major issue because it hides some costs that then are imposed on agricultural workers, on small farmers, or on the environment, because the fact that food is cheap doesn't mean that somebody else is not paying for that. Those that are paying are in these vulnerable actors, and also the environment. And indeed, there is a sector where the solution, by the way, shouldn't be increasing cost. We are very clear on that because consumers are workers and we know in which situation we are facing. But yes, part of the solution, because as I said, we need an holistic approach, but part of the solution and the most urgent issue is a better redistribution of health, is tackling this ongoing process of concentration on financialization, which is affecting most vulnerable actors. If you look just at some economic indicators and looking only at the dividend increase of shareholder of the 4 biggest multinational companies, Nestlé, Unilever, Mondelez, and Danone. We don't have the time, but looking at that from 2012 to 2023, we have a major increase in dividends. If you look at share buybacks, again, with the intention to increase share value, once again, we have major increases, around 50, 100%, 50, 70% on average. So this is one of the issues. Another major issue is the huge power of retailers. So concentration, financialization, imbalances. Some of the previous speakers have mentioned this. Trade agreements that are most of the time a source of dumping and also don't represent even an opportunity to raise labor standards in other countries, like the case of the Mercosur agreements. And then there are issues very much related to labor conditions. So poor number of labor inspections, very poor number, because labor inspectors are understaffed and the austerity measures have really hit hardly. Very difficult, major issues linked to migration. So the fact that there are a vast proportion of workers are migrant and mobiles, and therefore many are also, unfortunately, also undocumented, so cannot report any violation of their rights without risking retaliation or deportation. So these are the long-standing issues. Then the solution are many, social policy measures. But for us, of course, very important is to overcome the voluntary principle. And on this, I'm happy to elaborate more than in the question, if you will give me the opportunity, because the 4 minutes are over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Enrico. We'll come back to that. That's a key issue, and it will be one of the first questions. But at first, I'd like to pass to Mariangels Fortuny. Thank you, Mariangels, for joining us, and please give us your perspective. I think you have a slide presentation, just a very brief one.
I do have a presentation. I'm trying to share the screen. I haven't shared, otherwise I'll do it without that. Can you see it or not really?
Not full screen yet. If you could click on full screen. That's fine.
Something is working more or less. Okay. So, yeah, so let me give you from the ILO more of a global perspective. I mean, what I'm saying is not so much focusing on the situation in Europe, but the situation of agriculture globally. And as a starter, I would say that, you know, globally agriculture is a massive employer. It's basically an important source of employment and livelihoods. And basically, it's actually the largest employer, the largest sectoral employer. However, of course, it's characterized by what we call a very important decent work deficits. And of course, globally, the challenges are more acute than in Europe. But just to say that of the 160 million of child labor, 70% work in agriculture. And basically, a lot of them face hazardous working conditions. So it is a paradoxical situation because basically agriculture is the largest employer, but agricultural workers are amongst the most, those that are most food insecure. So those that produce the food are those that are the hungriest. And basically this is because of the decent work deficits that these people is facing. There is a rapid population growth, and it's calculated that food production has to increase by 70% by 2050. So basically, I would like to say that the ILO's decent work agenda offers the instruments, the approaches, and the tools to support governments, employers, and workers to promote decent work and in agriculture and to promote meaningful change. In 2024, we adopted the ILO policy guidelines on the promotion of decent work in the agri-food sector. That's a tripartite agreed document. It's a very important policy document that basically provides guidance on the promotion of decent work in the sector. It's basically organized around the 4 pillars of decent work, of rights at work, social dialogue, decent jobs, and social and labor protection. And last but not least, 2 very important documents for the sector is one that was adopted in 2011, which is the ILO Code of Practice on Safety and Health in Agriculture. And in 2026, in a few months, we are going to basically discuss a code of practice on safety and health in aquaculture. With the growing population, aquaculture, together with agriculture, is a very, very increasingly important sector worldwide, and one that faces important occupational safety and health challenges. So this is, we hope this is going to be a very useful code of practice for those workers engaged in aquaculture. Sorry. So I would like to underscore the ILO. Of course, it's a standard setting organization. We have dedicated instruments to agriculture that were adopted already in the 1920s. There are about 30. They relate to organization of work, occupational safety and health, labor inspection, as well as protection and insurance. And basically, the ILO has what we call the standard review mechanism that's in place. And in 2021, actually, these protection and insurance instruments were reviewed, and basically they were considered still to be contemporary and relevant for the sector. Besides those instruments that we have that are on agriculture, we have what we call the fundamental ILO conventions and the sorry, I think I jumped a slide. My presentation is a bit messy. Maybe I stop sharing. Sorry for that. We have basically these fundamental ILO conventions and the 1998 declaration The 8 conventions relate to freedom of association and collective bargaining, forced labor, child labor, discrimination, and equal remuneration. And furthermore, importantly, occupational safety and health since 2022 is a new fundamental principle and right at work. And what it means that basically that ILO member states, whether they have ratified or not these conventions, they have to promote and implement these fundamental principles and rights at work. So basically, going to the voluntary ethical trade market mechanisms, I would like to underscore that they are an opportunity to promote decent work and international labor standards. Decent work offers a very valid framework for these voluntary ethical and trade market mechanisms, but I would like to, at the end, underscore the importance of effective and efficient public governance that basically cannot be replaced. So governments do have the duty to adopt, implement, and enforce national laws and regulations, and to ensure that these fundamental principles and rights at work and ratified international conventions, they protect and are applied to all workers in the sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria-Angels. We sort of looked at a few key areas and for questions, and there are two issues. One issue was previously mentioned with social conditionality, and I'm going to come to that now. And the other has been about the food chain. There was a question from Magda about large distributors and retailers, and the background to this, and I have experience in other areas on pesticides, is that a lot of the retailers and distributors and supermarkets prefer to engage through multi-actor forums, as Vidya said earlier, or through ethical trade forums, which Sergio works with. And there's a very good reason for that, because of the high sensitivity in the media. Supermarkets, the good supermarkets or retailers, even can make themselves vulnerable. So I think that's part of the answer. It would be good to have had them here, but we feel that it's hard for them to take a public stand, even the good ones. But that's something we should come back to. I'm going to now move to Stoyan and Enrico on the same question, so Enrico can prepare. But Stoyan, so if we have these voluntary mechanisms which we're working on, don't they sort of remove obligations from employers under CAP social conditionality, or do they replace the laws, or how do you see them? And please, everybody note that CAP social conditionality doesn't apply in principle to horticulture. So there's a double question there, Stoyan, but yeah. And I understand you're answering from the committee and not from a personal perspective.
Yes. Yes. Well, we do have an official opinion on this one, and it's tackled in more than one of our opinions. But yes, as a committee member, I have to say that the CAP subsidies should be more conditional, more respect for social targets, which is understandable also from perspective as a farmer, believe me, because although in my farm I have mostly people that are occupied the year round, but I do need some seasonal workers, and believe me, if they're not happy, no one is happy. So in personal note, but in our committee we have a very strong position on this, that compliance with the human and labor rights, ensuring decent living conditions, pensions rights, and minimum wage, it's absolutely mandatory in order to go forward and to be up to the European standards of living. So social conditionality and collective agreements, it's absolutely, for us, in the future of the CAP, it's mandatory. Well, now, of course, we do have some representatives in the committee that are actually representing a little bit more conservative view of farmers' organizations, but we managed to forge a an agreement and to stand behind those statements, in our opinions.
Thank you. I'm going to pass to Enrico and then to Claudia on this same question. Enrico had already prepared, but Claudia has time to also. But Enrico, please.
Yeah, so first of all, just to say an important thing, because we keep mentioning this, but I understand the message doesn't go through. So the fact that social conditionality doesn't apply to horticulture is not true. It applies also to horticulture. We have made a research ourselves. It applies to a less extent than other sectors. But according to our data, it applies up to 26% in the German horticulture sector, for example. And in any case, according to every country, according to our assessment, it never goes below the 5% of the total income. I'm talking about the total income of a farmer, because direct payments apply to everybody and social conditionality apply to everybody. But I will send you something on this, Alun. I will send you our report. Our assessment when it comes to voluntary mechanism, etc., is that, of course, we welcome any kind of initiative, any kind of ethical trade initiative. We are familiar with some of them. We are part of some of them, and we share the objective, of course, and we appreciate the value and the engagement, particularly because these are moved by the increasing interest, in particular in some countries, of consumers to consume products which are not only environmentally sustainable, but also socially one. But there is an important point in all this. I don't think we can mix environment with social. The approach is completely different. If I am buying a product which is organic or that has particular has been produced in a particular way, then I'm doing something which is above the minimum standards that would apply in any case. Yeah. For social, for us, it is clear that the respect for workers' rights, the respect for applicable collective bargaining, the respect for not having child labor, this is the minimum that we need to have. It doesn't have to be a specificity, a characteristic, or a premium that we give to somebody that produce. This kind of standards should apply to everybody. And that's why the due diligence directive was so important, because it had overcome this voluntary approach. Overcoming this voluntary approach, that was the corporate social responsibility approach that we had before. Unfortunately, as some speakers have said before, this approach and this directive, which was very, very important, has been watered down. It has been watered down for the call of simplification. A call for simplification that has also been pushed by farmers' organizations, but that, from my point of view, has been addressed in a very wrong way, because demonstration from farmers that we have also supported were mainly linked to a bad distribution of wealth across the food chain. They were mainly linked to a problem of income and also concerns about the trade agreements, and not I never heard the farmer complaining about, for example, the fact that we had the due diligence directive, or the fact that we had civil liability, which is the right of a victim of abuse to claim justice through the due diligence directive. So this has been a wrong approach. Something that the Commission has sold to the employers, not only in agriculture, to other sectors as well. But there is only a way, and we see this in other branches and sectors and with other policy initiatives as well. It's only a way to undermine the important system of rights, of protection, of environmental standards, of food safety standards, because Europe is exporting quality, and we know that also these standards are undermined through trade agreements, also with the one with the Trump administration, for example. But it's only a way to undermine all these standards, workers' rights, which are perceived as an obstacle to grow. And this is a fake news. This is completely a fake news. Now, social conditionality, as you know, it's an additional tool to raise labor standards. But as I was saying before, we need an holistic approach. We need to act on collective bargaining, strengthening collective bargaining. And very important is the directive on minimum wage and collective bargaining. We need to halt on health and safety standards. We need to tackle gang master practices. We have major problems linked to gang masters, caporalato system in the agriculture sector. We need to promote the good practices that exist. We need to strengthen labor inspections. We have some regions where we have only less than 1% of the CAP beneficiaries that have an inspection every year. Yeah, in some regions, according to our studies in Germany, one asparagus farm has the possibility to be inspected once every 350 years. What are we talking about? So we have to act on those elements, social policy aspect. We need to act on the market, tackling the imbalances, and then we need a strong common agricultural policy with a strong social dimension. Social conditionality is part of it, but we need to go beyond that. We need to introduce labor dimensions in the distribution of CAP payments, not only looking at the eligible hectare criteria, for example.
Thank you, Enrico. Thank you. So I'm going to pass to Claudia. There's a lot of issues there that came up. So the first issue would be about the value of CSR mechanisms, the issue of social conditionality, and then the due diligence directive, and then the trade agreements. There were 4 issues there, Claudia, and I don't want to, but maybe you could start off with the CSR mechanisms and social conditionality, if that's okay.
Yes, Alon, thank you for the question. Really complex to try to discuss about them in a few minutes, because my colleagues taught a lot of things, touch a lot of delicate topics, and I don't want to hidden as employers and as a representative of employers, and talking about all these mechanisms, starting from CSR and coming to the social conditionality. First, just one very clear statement, and Enrico knows in its memory very, very well that for us, for employers, it has no sense to be against compliance in labor legislation, because it means for us that we allow unfair competition between farmers. So this is one statement that I would like to do. Then the second step is, how do we work with these new rules, with the new regulation? Because we have to talk that, we have to say, and you know very well, that social conditionality is very recent in our legislation. And our worries when it was introduced in Europe and in the new CAP, and it was not about the principle of social conditionality, because it's clear that our employers, that employers that we represent, they respect collective agreement, they respect labor law. Enrico said that the majority part of us is in compliance with the law. And fortunately, they are, because we represent a very strong sector, and Mariangela fortunately showed us how we are in our incidence into the European employment and the future of the group of our Europe. So this is one side. What on which we are worried, and we still are worried now, it's about the real application of these rules. And we noticed that talking about social conditionality, one of our original concerns is not been solved, and it regards the different system of control legislation, control system that are completely different from one country to another, and are completely not well harmonized. So this is one step. It's very important, because we are in Europe, we are European Union, we have the privilege, and we work hard to have high standard on labor law, and we have to avoid the risk to have inside the European Union different situation between countries. So this is one first step that probably the legislator, before introduce the social conditionality, had to have in his mind. How do I think about the harmonization of system control between the EU countries? So this is one point. And the second point is about a sort of uncertainty that the farmers have regarding this new regulation, because I don't want to be too technical about that, but that you are paid for your your amount about the cap, and then you will have controls, don't know exactly when, about the social conditionality, and you do not any certainty about when and if you have to give back that money. So this is a question that can be probably be implemented and trying to do a better work, because if I am farmer, I need to well plan my business. And how many uncertainties we face each day about the climate, about the market, about the price. And we need to have certain that this is the rule and this is the time lapse on which the rule will apply. So this is one other side that really scares us. And the third one I would like to touch, because the topic of our discussion, it was focused on that. And we talk a lot about the high standard, because our high standard of European labor legislation and European system of collective agreement that's really mature. And we are very less concerned, not us, obviously, but I talk in generally, we are less concerned about these requirements when we talk about the non-EU countries. And this is a problem. We talk about the Mercosur. I hope that one question, it was about that, because we are inside the European Union, we try to do the best that we can, also with social conditionality, also with the requirement on environmental, but we have to care a lot about what the others do. And what the others, it means Mercosur, in this case, is very hot topics, very well. And one of the biggest worry is all this in legislation set in the European Union that is a very high level. We can improve. Yes, we can improve. But what do we do about reciprocity when we talk about trade and commercial agreement? This is one of our major worries about the labor legislation and respect of labor law. I don't know. I don't want to be too long. I hope that I answered to your question.
Thank you, Claudia. And I think you did. And I think what you said about Mercosur, I think the target audience in this meeting, I think there is a general overview which is shared by many people. I don't think in this meeting we have trade, international trade ambassadors from DG Trade here. And if someone wants to speak, but I think that what you just said about Mercosur, with a few nuances, that would be from the agricultural sector, even from the MEP Sergio Como, there would be a general agreement. So we won't go that way, if that's okay. I'm gonna ask Maria-Angels a last question. So we've seen in all of these reports that there's a lack of labor inspection, OSH training, occupational health services, labor contracts, social protection. In your view, from the ILO, can voluntary compliance systems make up for shortcomings in regulatory approaches? We saw the Brazil example where the voluntary mechanisms turned into national laws, which was very interesting. Could you perhaps answer that question, Maria-Angels?
Yes, and I think that having heard all the speakers, and I mean, the example that was being given, for example, on the challenge of labor inspection, and how little labor inspections are taking place. I mean, imagine this worldwide in developing countries. I would say that the challenges that the sector is facing are so structural. I mean, is labor inspection, there is basically accessing social protection for agricultural workers in very poor countries as key to basically reduce informality. They're so structural that any voluntary compliance mechanism can't really compensate for these very structural gaps that the sector is facing. However, this doesn't mean that that they are not useful, and they have to be considered. And I would say that they do play a complementary role. That in some cases, as you mentioned in Brazil, I mean, they can translate into good practices or national legislation, but we can't simply assume that these voluntary mechanisms can basically compensate or substitute the role of effective public policies. So in a nutshell, I would say that the solution is probably to have a good policy mix of these mechanisms that can also help with, it was the case of Brazil, that they really help with increased awareness. It helped with advocacy and resulted in good policies and practices. But we can't assume that, and basically it can't be left in the hands of voluntary mechanisms. We need good government, we need public policies, and we need social dialogue. We need employers and workers, tripartite social dialogue, to find solutions to the structural problems that the sector is facing.
Thank you, Maria-Ángeles. We're going to finish with one key question here, and I think this is the trend which has come through the whole session, right from the beginning, even starting with Dietmar's presentation. It's about the power play between the different actors and how the profit margins are shared between those different players, and how probably, if I can say, the supermarkets or the retailers place pressure on the weakest part of the chain. And this comes back to what Eric mentioned, and also Stoyan, about CMO, this word, which I'm going to ask Stoyan to explain again what the CMO is, and the minimum price. How can those two measures, which are not social issues, they're financial market issues, how can they affect the working conditions in the future through these mechanisms? Stoyan, please.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I don't know how many minutes you have for me, but that's a really big chapter. Just a common market organization. Actually, it's targeting exactly the rules on which the European food market operates. But in many cases, first of all, let's start that in many cases, the market is already a little bit messed up, because some people speak about commodities and we speak about food. And those are two different notions, because it's for us, European agriculture, it's time to switch a little bit the focus, because it's impossible to compete on the commodity markets, because the prices are not set by us. And there is major players that are actually using the commodities as weapons. They are weaponizing the food. So this is the first big issue, because the farmers are not properly remunerated. They are producing they are buying energy on a retail price, and then they have to sell the production on a cost price. So, and of course, if you're on, it's very popular, but if you're on red, it's difficult to be green. The same applies to have a proper remuneration for the labor force that is actually helping in the farm side. So another big issue is that we have this market concentration and concentration of the financial ownership. So this is a power that is imposing their rules, and it was mentioned by Enrico before, but they are looking at the interest for the shareholders. They are not looking for the interest of not only the survival of the agri-food sector, which again, I'm putting in the same basket farmers and workers, because in many cases this is the same person, or it's member of the family that it's actually not remunerated, or some from the family that is helping. But this market regulation is not serving actually the most vulnerable, and it's working against them. Third component is the financialization of the sector, because in many cases, again, it's important what is going to be from the profit side and how they're going to manipulate the markets, and nobody thinks about who is producing actually. And at the end of the day, it's who is on the field and who is bearing all the cost of this production.
Thank you, Stoyan. That was an excellent class, even for me. I'm going to ask Claudia to supplement that with anything, not to repeat, because I think many things you would probably agree with, but anything to supplement before I pass to Enrico to close on this point, and then we'll close the session.
Yes, very few words, because Stoyan said a lot, and I agree with a lot of the things he said. But I just would like to conclude with some, for us, important challenges for the future that can touch. We are not magicians, so we are not one solution for all, but we can think about a mix of solutions. So talking about what the legislation and the legislature could do to help and to improve the power of farmers into the supply chain. I think that this was the question. First of all, we have to review, and I know that the Commission is still working on that, the unfair trading practices legislation. This is important for us. We have to strengthen some points of this legislation, like, first of all, just one example is the mandatory written contracts. This is one point that for us is really make the difference between one little farmer that has power and one little farmer that has no power. If anything if the contractual agreement are not formal, are not written, they don't not exist. So we have to improve this legislation in all the member states. In Italy, we have a very strictly legislation about written contract, but not everywhere is the same. And this is one thing. The other thing, and Stoyan touched about that, we have to strengthen the aggregation among agricultural enterprises. This will give more power to the farmers, and this means to possibly reinforce the common agricultural market with some measure that incentives the farmers to stay together and to form a very big mass of power respecting the supermarket. So this is the two things that I think that legislator can improve to help us to have more power. And just want to conclude, because I think this is my latest intervention, is that it's a general reflection on what I came up today in this discussion, very interesting for us, is if we want attractive wages and adequate housing, safe working condition in our sector that is very delicate, voluntary mechanism, certification are good, but must be aligned with fair trading practices and fair prices. This is which I would like to conclude with this.
Thank you, Claudia. So Enrico, if we can sort out the supply chain, then worker conditions are going to have a spin-off, or how do you see this?
Well, yes, absolutely yes. And I think, as you have correctly said, we need to act on two major fronts, two major systemic issues. And one is the process of financialization, and the second one is concentration. When it comes to financialization, you rightly said, Alon, I mean, there is the possibility also through EU measures to tackle short-termism. The issue is the short-term view. The issue is that shareholders are pushing companies to look at the short term. to to increase their profits. And if you look into that, I mean, this is the root cause of our of all the imbalances and the issues that we face along the agro-food chain. By the way, the root causes of the increasing inequalities that we have in our society. So what can we do? There are a lot of measures. We made a project on this. We came up with proposals as EFAT as well. I can share it as well in a project, but also in a resolution. So there is a way to, for example, we should address share buybacks. We should ban share buybacks or limit share buybacks. We need to reform the EU Shareholders' Rights Directive. Yeah, we need to regulate private equity funds. Yeah, we need to introduce elements that limit speculation in the share market, but also in food commodity markets. Yeah, so in this respect, example like the financial transaction tax were good ideas that would have limit speculation that we have in the market. Another issue is indeed linked very much to the speculation existing in food commodity markets, and also the ESC has made an opinion on this with very good proposals. So the measures are there, the possibilities are there. What is missing is the willingness, is the political will. I must say that what is also missing is a clear call from all the agro-food stakeholders to act together in this respect. I think farmers should be much more vocal. I'm very clear on this in tackling financialization. They are among the first victims. And unfortunately, they are not at the moment. I never heard any proposal to tackle financialization, for example. Another issue is concentration. Concentration, certainly, aggregation and making farmers stronger, and trade unions also, of course. But in this respect, I think there are also other policy measures that can be done. For example, EFAT keep calling. Yeah. Just 1 second. EFAT keep calling for amending the EU merger regulation, because we are facing this process of merger more and more along the whole agro-food chain. And mergers are mainly done only looking at the economic aspect, the dominant position, but they never look into what is the consequence on environment or on social or on jobs when Monsanto and Bayer came together, for example. So these are just a few examples on how to tackle also that dimension. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrico. We're going to pass to the next session now, but I'm very pleased to see that if I didn't know who you and Claudio were, I wouldn't know which organization you represented. And I say that in the best of sense, that you are united in many things. And I thank you all today. I'm going to pass to David to chair the last session. Thank you, David.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I couldn't agree more, Alan. The final session that we've just had has been really, really interesting and very, very informative. But firstly, in terms of wrapping things up today from my own point of view, I want to thank all of you for your participation. And in particular, my sincere gratitude to EU OSH for co-organizing this webinar today. But I also want to draw attention to the work that we have been doing in terms of collaborating with Dignity Firm, the International Association on Work in Agriculture, and the Decent Work for Equitable Food Systems. The synergies developed between us is, I think, exemplary and has contributed to the development of a really interesting program that's brought together research, practice, and policy. And this is at the heart, certainly, of SafeHabitus in terms of bringing together these different perspectives to get a detailed understanding what evidence is there, maybe where are the gaps in that evidence, and we've heard some of that today, and how has that evidence been translated into practice or policy. So I also want to thank everyone who's stayed with us, asked questions, and engaged with the critical issues that we've been discussing here today. What we've heard represents years of research and experience and engagement from stakeholders from across a variety of continents. And we've also picked up on some of the practices in other sectors as well. From my own point of view, I've taken a lot of notes, But there's really two things that I want to draw attention to, and I think Alan's final comment there reflects this. There's remarkable consensus on what the issues are here in terms of some of the core challenges that we're faced with. So whether we're examining strawberries in Spain and Morocco, or bananas in Ecuador and Colombia, or coffee, our presenters throughout the whole day identified many of the same fundamental challenges. And the two that really stood out for me, well, the one that really stood out, and then it links to the second, it's this issue of power asymmetry, okay, or power imbalance along what are buyer-driven supply chains that largely concentrate control at the top. And as a consequence, it pushes risks and costs downwards. And associated with that, we heard a really strong message that there's a very clear link between these market structures and the practices associated with them and the working conditions of farmers and farm workers. And it's that point that Enrico made at the end, that farmers are involved in this as well. Farmers are, in inverted commas, some of the victims of what are going on here. And until the conditions improve for both farmers, farm businesses, we're going to find it very, very difficult to improve working conditions for farm workers, whether they're seasonal, migrant, or local, or even family members. So there are really key challenges here that need to be overcome. And in terms of how do we overcome those, well, we see what I would consider to be a tension between regulatory optimism and regulatory skepticism from the discussion that we've had here today. Okay. And that's actually to be welcomed. It isn't something that there is a simple solution here, but for us taking one simple step, we can solve this problem. We all know that that is not the case, and nobody here said that, okay? But what we did here was a nuanced perspective on this, and the need for stronger enforceable regulatory frameworks with fundamental reform of commercial practices. But we also need to see strengthened. And it was, I think, the word credible, multi-stakeholder initiatives. These were key terms that were used in our discussion that happened in the middle of today's webinar. And for me, that really resonated. It's that aspect that we need genuine initiatives that bring together the variety of stakeholders and provide them with roles and responsibility and resources with which to engage with these types of platforms and help improve working conditions in agriculture. And that's where I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to say thank you once again to everyone, but in particular, I'd like to thank Alan for his leadership of Work Package 6 within SafeHabitus. And it's part of that work that Alan has been organizing these policy webinars and seminars. And he has done a really amazing job in bringing us all together here today. So again, I'd like to thank you, Alan, and hand back to you.
Thank you, David. I said I'd give Carlos 3 takeaways because it all started with him. So three takeaways, Carlos.
Yes, I guess you can hear me. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for all the speakers for your contribution. It's been really interesting, and above all, it's been important to have this space to speak clearly about decent work in agriculture, and also the implication of the value change in this. Many important ideas have been shared today. A policy brief will be produced with more consolidated policy recommendation. But for now, as Alan said, I will share just three main ideas that come from the event today, also for the report that we create. From a policy perspective, the key recommendations are to implement the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive in a strong and ambitious way with clear obligations, effective oversight, and real sanctions to ensure real access to justice and remedy for people harmed in supply chains by removing practical barriers, to include a clear requirements on living wage beyond legal minimum wages, at least, to align due diligence rules with commercial practice so low prices and unfair contracts terms do not undermine decent work, and to close gaps in the directive through solid transposition and future updates that make these rules work in practice. This is just a little brief. Many ideas came today, and thank you very much to everybody. Thank you.
So I'm going to thank the speakers, excellent speakers. Thanks for the commitment. Please, let's carry on. We have to carry this on. We will come with a policy brief and we'll involve you in that. We have to turn this into a joint movement because everybody is in agreement here. Thank you to the interpreters. Thank you to EFAT for providing the interpretation for today. I'm going to do I've got no minutes left, but I'm going to do a speed word. I'm going to go say keywords, what I think summarize today. So multipartite. EU OSH has tripartite. We need to have multipartite OSH. This is not just about employers, workers, and whatever now. The world has changed since the labor laws were created. It's multipartite now. Compliance was a key issue of supply chains, the relationships in that, and the power. The burden on the people down the bottom, the small people, whether it's number of audits, whether it's responsibility, and where that power lies. I think we covered that earlier. Document checking, let's be flexible, like mentioned by I think it was some of the ILO speakers or VD, I can't remember, sorry, apologies. Supermarkets, yeah, they need to be here. Maybe we need to involve their associations, although sometimes they have challenges as well in participating. Certification. OSH is not the major issue. I mean, I told you I worked on pesticides and I had a debate on pesticides. Pesticides and agroecology is a bigger driver, so we have to create synergies with that movement. Commodities. DG Employment funds ILO program partially. So this just shows you, and DG INTPA is very much interested in commodities, that we need to build on the commodities and make sure that is decent, work friendly. Power imbalances we mentioned, pricing situations, markets. Again, I'm repeating. Audits play a key role, but they're not the only thing. They're part of creating an OSH culture. And OSH culture, market tools. I'm going through my notes. Large distributors we mentioned. The cheap food. We need to break the back of cheap food, which is probably a dumping of social standards or somebody's standards because somebody has to pay for it. And if it's too cheap, then there's an issue. That's what I understood. It's not my opinion. Redistribution of wealth. This sounds a little bit from the 60s and whatever, but it's not about redistribution of wealth. It's about fairness in the supply chain, I think, rather than redistribution of wealth, so that everybody has what they need to survive and to have a good living. Trade agreements. The message has been given by the agricultural organizations. We can't work in a vacuum. This is very much linked, and we'll see what the court says, but this issue will come up again. Social conditionality is something which has its challenges, but like CSR mechanisms, it has a role to play. And CSR mechanisms we've seen today are not perfect. They need to be improved. Social conditionality, there needs to be a discussion on that. Although I don't think the employers and the workers will see eye to eye 100%, but this debate needs to continue. I'm going to try and finish, but what really struck me today were all of these economic rules about markets, about commodities, which have nothing to do with our sector, but which are affecting us. And we need to do our homework and learn more, especially me. But I know that we are in safe hands with EFAT and GIOPA and the committee. But we need to link those issues so that we ensure that the market mechanisms don't have unintended consequences. And we are seeing those in some of those commodity chains in Europe and globally. And it's disheartening sometimes to see that these issues still exist in Europe sometimes when we thought that this was an issue for third developing countries. We need to ensure that globally standards are raised. I'll finish there. Thank you, everybody. It's been a wonderful morning and I've learned a lot, and we hope to repeat these issues again. We'll be back in touch in October. We're hoping to organize an exhibition in the Parliament with Eric Sergio Como, and these issues will come up again. Thank you very much. And thank you to my team here for supporting. They've been great. And thank you to everybody.